Chapter 634. Tempera. Not only him, but even the culinary demons in the audience were stunned by such a conclusion. What the hell? Why'd he suddenly change from fried chicken to tempura? Even if they were both fried foods, he shouldn't have said something so ridiculous, right? However, when Johnny's smile stiffened slightly, everyone couldn't help but believe him. Could this really be a King tempura? Indeed, if one looked at it from this angle. All the fried foods were extremely thin, and when the audience looked down at the box in Gwashuk's hand, they discovered that there wasn't even a trace of oil in the white paper box. Moreover, looking at the even heat, there was no doubt that all the ingredients had been cooked in such a short time. Just by looking at it, one could tell that the taste was excellent. I've never heard of tempura in industrial cuisine, Mr. Gujijian. Gwashuk looked at the chicken leg in his hand and smiled as he looked up. Is this considered a rebellion against the master? This is called pioneering and innovating. Johnny arrogantly raised his head. As a disciple, if you only know how to stick to the old ways and follow the master's path, you won't be as useful as a $200 friar. Then, what's the point of being a culinary demon? You're saying the same thing as my student. Gwashuk raised his eyebrows and looked at the fried chicken tempura in his hand. Soon, he said, if this old man didn't see wrong, this should be a unique way of cooking in the Ryukyu region. Amazing fusion, Johnny Gujijian. In the future, industrial cuisine will be greatly expanded by you. I can feel your master's gratification. To be able to perfectly fuse two completely different cuisines, as expected of the Americas. Even though he was praising him with such admiration, he didn't feel happy at all. When those eyes looked at him, it was as if he couldn't hide any secrets. Even the source of his creativity was clearly seen. Johnny Gujijian didn't feel any fear or uneasiness. Instead, he became even more excited. Only with such an opponent could there be fun in challenging him. Have I been seen through? Johnny nodded. That's right. This is a brand new Exxon fried chicken set. Although it's made using the concept of industrial cuisine, the way it's made came from my hometown. Although it's not a problem to call it a fried chicken set meal, it's the name of the war. It originates from the industrial cuisine of Ryukyu, engine oil tempura. Please, Grandpa. He gestured with his hand and said, eat it while it's hot. You can live longer if you eat it. Gwashuk looked at the things in the box and couldn't help but shake his head. No matter how delicious these things are, eating them will only shorten one's lifespan, right? In Ryukyu, who hasn't eaten it when they were young? This is the crystallization and delicacy of an era of hunger and thirst. Things like life and death depend on fate. When you're alive, you should eat happily. So, the Ryukyu people really don't know how to maintain their health. Gwashuk shook his head and raised his hand. Then have a taste. Just like swallowing an elixir, he opened his mouth and bit into the fried chicken with his gums, which only had a few teeth left. At that moment, an appetizing sound spread out and resounded in everyone's ears. Everyone couldn't help but swallow their saliva. The first thing they felt was the rich fragrance of the meat, followed by the terrifying spiciness and the sweet and sour taste of the sauce. When the fragrant and tender chicken, wrapped in the magical smell of engine oil, slid down their throats, they felt as if their mouths and noses were burning and shrouded in flames. Then a bomb exploded in their sense of taste. It was an explosion in the physical sense. A low rumble suddenly sounded from the hunchback body. A terrifying power erupted from the weak stomach. The moment it came into contact with the stomach acid, the spices that were evenly kneaded into the muscles triggered an exquisite combination reaction under the interference of the source substance. Then, in the blink of an eye, it achieved an explosive explosion. Black smoke spewed out of Gwashuk's mouth and nose. It was so dense. But then there was a tearing sound because Gwashuk was expanding. His joints were rubbing against each other, and his muscles were squirming. The hunchbacked old man gradually straightened his back and began to swell like a balloon. A terrifying heat began to rise from under his rapidly tensing skin. The heat hidden within his muscles was transforming, quickly transforming into a wave of vitality that poured into the old man's body. It didn't matter whether or not the old man could withstand it. It wanted to completely destroy him from the inside out. However, he didn't collapse. Instead, he transformed into a muscular old man with white hair as thick as a lion's. His upper body was naked, and his sturdy muscles were covered in scars. He was no longer as old as before. Instead, he had become fierce, cold, violent, and dignified. How was he still a hunchbacked old man? He was clearly a savage, giant ape from the mountains that roamed among tens of thousands of beasts. Right in front of Johnny, the ferocious old man opened his mouth and devoured the oil tempera in his hand, sucking away the oil stains on his fingers. He wasn't stingy with his praise. Oh, so much vitality. This spicy sensation is so wonderful. It can actually restore me to my 90-year-old state. He sighed in amazement. Johnny Gujijian, you're amazing. The spicy wave of vitality didn't burn him to death. Instead, it caused him to become excited. He finished the drumstick in his hand in a few mouthfuls. Then he grabbed the chicken wing. He threw it into his mouth and couldn't stop at all. It was like a whirlwind sweeping away the clouds. He carefully savored the stimulating fragrance that kept erupting on the tip of his tongue. It was as if he was swallowing a bomb alive. He swallowed the essence of the disaster into his stomach bit by bit. The first thing he felt was hunger, then pain, and then despair. There was also that lingering greed. That's right, greed. Greed was the essence of this dish. At that moment, in front of Johnny Gujijian, the old man's movements stiffened for a moment. His ferocious face froze on the spot. Suddenly, a crack appeared. Incinerating light and thick black smoke continuously rose from within. Inside the empty shell, signs of the factory's rumbling could be heard. On that badly damaged face, Guashuk revealed a smile of approval. Johnny Gujijian, I have to admit that I've underestimated you. He raised his head and praised without holding back. It's really terrifying. I've already experienced your creation. It seems to be born from industry. But in fact, in order to fill one's stomach, even if it's the blood of the earth like oil, it's no different from subliming a person into an indestructible steel. You must have an even more terrifying dish that you haven't taken out, right? Just like that, he swallowed the overly large chicken set meal in his hand into his stomach. He allowed the crack on his face to spread, revealing the illusion of the city hidden in the haze and thick smoke. In order to survive, he didn't hesitate to destroy the world. In order to continue living, he didn't hesitate to destroy himself. Such crazy determination and willpower made people praise and applaud him. I can say with certainty, Johnny. He raised a finger and announced solemnly, if it weren't for me, there would be no one else other than you who would be the champion of this competition. It's a pity that you met me today. In his mouth, the burger that was burning with raging flames was completely swallowed into his stomach. In one gulp, he absorbed the prototype of the disaster that had fused with countless industrial wastes into his body. Then, the thick smoke, flames, and the huge illusion of the industrial industry behind the crack on his face completely disappeared without a trace. What replaced them was nothingness. There was nothing in the empty shell under the flesh and blood. Or rather, there was some strange light. It was as if there was the outline of the earth, nature, mountains, rivers, and all things. There were dark stars moving in the ferocious sea. However, things cannot be seen clearly. He could only instinctively understand one thing. The industrial cuisine, no, the industry itself, was swallowed in front of him. The crack shrank inch by inch. Guashuk grinned and laughed tyrannically. The successor of Iya is an ominous thing that would even eat his own children for the sake of delicious food. A mere piece of steel is nothing to him. Johnny's will was firm, and he froze on the spot. It was as if he had been frozen. It was difficult to hide the uneasiness in his heart. At that moment, the ferocious darkness that he saw through the crack, the terrifying nature of this old thing in front of him. Guashuk was still smiling as he looked around. Next, it should be my turn, right? As he spoke, he lowered his head and looked at the huge pot of oil on the cooking table. Ignoring the boiling oil, he stretched out his finger, dipped it, and sucked it into his mouth. He sighed with emotion, clear and sweet. What a good pot of oil. Can you lend it to me? In the silence, Johnny's expression was gloomy as he slowly nodded. He wanted to see what this old thing was going to do with his pot of oil. Guashuk's body gradually stooped, returning to its former stooped and shriveled state. His muscles relaxed, and his appearance changed from fierce to ugly. It was abominable. After circling the pot of oil a few times, he nodded thoughtfully. This is a rare opportunity. Then here, I will show everyone a famous Doomsday dish, boiled cabbage. The entire arena was dead silent. Boiled cabbage. Boiled cabbage again? Do you F***king know how to make anything else? This is a F***king pot of oil. Why the hell are you making boiled cabbage? You only said boiled cabbage. Where is your cabbage? Are you going to forget it again? Johnny could not bear the humiliation. He punched the chopping board and shouted angrily. Old thing, can't you not make a fool of yourself with that outdated thing? Guashuk frowned and fell into silence. After a long time, he shook his head helplessly and sighed. Outdated? That's too much. He sighed, bent down, opened his toolbox, took out the seasonings one by one, and placed them on the table in convenient places. Even an old man like me is still studying today. He raised his eyes and calmly told the young man in front of him, reading books, reading newspapers, using the internet, participating in competitions, shamelessly mixing in groups, shamelessly praising young people, secretly learning, blackmailing. I am willing to do anything to win. For the sake of this desire for good food, I will not hesitate to go to hell. He started from the time he walked into the kitchen at the age of 3. He became a chef at the age of 12, finished his apprenticeship at the age of 16, and surpassed his master at the age of 20. At the age of 25, he began to travel around the world. At the age of 41, he turned his eyes to the border. At the age of 62, he chose to go to hell. In order to pursue the ultimate desire for good food, he did not hesitate to set foot on the land of bliss. He even completed the great deed of meeting the rancher and returning. Dongsha cuisine, Roman cuisine, Ingzhou cuisine, American cuisine, Russian Federation cuisine, from breakfast to dinner, from desserts to wine. Guashuk continued to devour everything, constantly pursuing a deeper limit. Until today, he had never given up in the slightest. Now, he was actually called an outdated old thing. Wasn't that too much? Wasn't that underestimating his culinary skills too much? Wasn't that too looking down on all the chef demons that he had eaten too much? Watch carefully, Mr. Gujijian. This is the outdated cuisine that you don't take seriously. But even if it's an outdated cuisine, there will be a day when it can be rejuvenated. He raised his hand, picked up the spoon beside him, and stirred the boiling oil in the pot. As long as the chef still exists, as long as the desire is not cut off, this precious meaning will always exist. What you lost to is not me, but this foundation that has been accumulated for thousands of years. Johnny crossed his arms and was about to retort, but his gaze was attracted by the blurry image in the pot of oil. Under the stirring of the spoon, the boiling oil in the pot calmed down inconceivably, reflecting something incredible. But then, the mirror image was broken again. This was because the clear oil was swirling, forming a small vortex, rippling in the pot of oil. Under the sprinkling of all kinds of seasonings, it seemed to have formed a clear soup. He casually took the leftover chicken and bones from Johnny and threw them into the pot of oil. A fiery fragrance rose. Unlike before, even the terrifying invasion of the oil disappeared without a trace, replaced by a faintly discernible gentleness and sweetness. It was like a floating paradise, glowing with a misty light, pure and sacred. In the deep light, something seemed to be rapidly sprouting and brewing, making him couldn't help but move closer to take a closer look. The closer he got, the more he could feel the warm and heavy fragrance from the chicken stewed in the oil. He couldn't help but drool. Under Johnny's gaze, the vortex of oil gradually calmed down, and the scene that he had caught a glimpse of finally appeared again, becoming clearer and clearer. Finally, from the reflection of the oil, he caught a glimpse of the outline hidden in the light. That blurry reflection, that was himself? In the audience, Huaishir was the first to react. He raised his hand and covered Zhang Shi's eyes. This was no longer a realm that could be described as simple boiled cabbage. And the next scene was not something that she could accept. Please appreciate. It gathers the essence of disaster from Doomsday in Rome. It's a new subspecies of fusion hell cuisine, boiled cabbage. Amidst the crisp sound of the soup being stirred and knocked on the edge of the pot, Gwashuk announced his work in fluent Latin. Boiling water, judgment caldaria. It was at that moment that a pure and unsullied light that seemed to come from heaven soared into the sky from the pot of oil, surpassing original sin and punishment, bringing with it the light of mercy and liberation. A generous hymn sounded from the illusion, as if it could redeem all sinners. At this moment, Johnny Gu Zijian finally walked into this paradise. Tempted by the illusion from hell, the man fell into the boiling pot of oil with a plop. Without any struggle, he sank to the bottom of the pot. Long before that, his soul had already been captured by the cauldron of the abyss. This was the last cabbage that was missing in the refreshing broth. Using opponents as ingredients was the specialty of the Yi cooking demon. At that moment, an intoxicating aroma finally gushed out from the pot. With a mellow smell, it enveloped the tip of everyone's nose and interweaved an illusion of heaven before their eyes. It was sweet and sinful, lingering in the darkest part of everyone's soul, whispering blasphemous or holy words in their ears. It was indeed the fusion cuisine that Gwashuk had mentioned. Through the cooking of boiled cabbage, after gathering the elements of water and fire, it formed the most primitive heresy trial, purifying everything in boiling water. In the end, it returned to being pure. The essence of the 5,000-year cuisine of Doomsday was fused with the disaster of the medieval Rome witch trials, creating a dish that was like divine punishment. The life that lived because of this pot would also die because of this pot. This was the true meaning of Paradise Lost. Then, young man, how does this dish taste? Gwashuk lowered his head, looking down at the pot of oil in front of him, and asked jokingly. Excellent. A muffled and admiring exclamation came from the pot of oil. Amidst the boiling grease, a thumb slowly rose. His body felt endless pain and suffering, but his soul was quiet and peaceful. It was as if he was going to sleep in this beautiful paradise. Even if it was treated as a part of the dish, Gu Zijian could not deny that this was the essence of the abyss that he could never reach in this disaster. There was also the huge gap between them. Even though he still had the strength to struggle, he no longer had any fighting spirit. When the old man stood in front of the pot of oil, he was already destined to be defeated. Learn to respect history, Mr. Gu Zijian. Even an old ghost like me will keep pace with the times. Gwashuk raised his hand and scooped a spoonful of boiling oil from the pot with a spoon. He put it into his mouth and tasted it carefully. It was hot enough to burn his throat into his stomach, savoring every change in taste. In the end, he could not help but shake his head regretfully. Unfortunately, in the end, it's still a little inexperienced. Shaking his head regretfully, the old man casually tossed the spoon aside and turned to leave. His stooped figure disappeared into the darkness little by little. The entire arena was dead silent. Apart from Gu Zijian, who was blowing bubbles in the pot of oil, no one else made a sound. The second round of the trial of the Imperial Chef Demon. Doomsday's Chef Demon, Gwashuk, wins. Today's boring little knowledge. As everyone knew, fried food consumed a lot of oil, especially tempura. After World War II, the poor people of Okinawa went crazy from hunger. It was naturally impossible for them to eat tempura. How could there be so much oil? Therefore, someone patted his head and thought of an idea. Why don't we just fry it with oil? Of course, fried oil would not taste good, and because there were many harmful substances in oil, it could even be life-threatening. However, everyone still had to eat it. Moreover, they were about to starve to death. Who cared so much? Moreover, it was said that the smell of fried oil was different from each other. Among them, the recognized best brand of oil was the prototype of the Exxon Energy Group, Mobil. Therefore, this thing's official name was Mobil Tempura. At that time, everyone ate it happily at various festivals. In various senses of the word, Moreover, once this thing started to explode, black smoke would billow. The people in the surrounding villages would look up. Wow, what a big smoke. It must be Uchiha's family who was frying tempura. Therefore, they would gather in groups to take a few bites. It was really hard to imagine that scene. According to many Japanese blogs, this thing is really edible. The proof is that all the old people in Okinawa have eaten it. I'm thinking people who eat it to death probably don't have the chance to become old, right? What was even worse was that after eating it, the oil could not be digested by the human body. In addition to the usual grain cycle, it would also seep out through the skin. It was said that there would be two big, oily marks on the stones where people sat down to rest after eating it. It was as magical as a photocopier. It was not easy to survive in these difficult times. You either starved to death or ate things that would kill you. Everyone should cherish the good life that you have now. Chapter 635. Gwashuk was very strong. More accurately, he was so strong that it made people scared. From a cooking demon's perspective, there was no way to surpass him. On the way back, Huaishir kept thinking about the scene he had just witnessed. It wasn't some dazzling skill. Instead, it was as simple and easy to understand as a bench press. He was showing off his strength. He was using his opponent's oil, his opponent's tools, and his opponent's spoon. He was growing his own fruit from the fertile soil of industrial cuisine. Even his opponent could easily become a part of his food. What Huaishir saw from Gwashuk's body was the essence behind the term cooking demon. It was a madness and terror that came from the extreme desire for good food. Over the course of 100 years, that old man had slowly absorbed the dew of the entire world, gathering it into his own terrifying ocean. Here, he was provoking and intimidating all of his opponents. This terrifying level of attainment had already become a mountain, weighing down on all of the contestants' hearts, making it hard for them to breathe, including Huaishir himself. Even if he had enough ingredients and time, would he be able to cook a soup that could compare to the boiled cabbage that his opponent had casually created? Huaishir didn't know. Most likely not. Perhaps there was a possibility, or perhaps there was a chance, but it was more likely that this was just his subconscious mind comforting himself. Apart from his control of negative origin substances and his research on poisons, he was just a half-baked cooking demon. If it weren't for the fact that Tangi had tricked him, he wouldn't have taken this exam. He carefully counted the basic culinary skills he learned from Uncle Fong, the culinary skills he learned from the Heavenly Dog, Longshan Square, the culinary skills he learned from the Heavenly Dog, Longshan Square, and the various advanced skills he learned from the various culinary demons during the process of compiling a simple recipe for cooking ingredients from hell. He had pieced everything together for free. His strength lay in his ability to deal with negative origin substances and poisons. His alchemy flames gave him absolute control over the flames, as well as the refinement of the forger's furnace. These few aspects made him completely superior to most cooking demons. However, his shortcomings were equally obvious. Apart from these few points, he did not reach the average level of everyone else. He did not have any secret techniques, experience accumulated over countless years, or even recipes that were passed down to only one person in the faction. How could an unorthodox method be compared to a professional? Look at your dog's heart and dog's face. How can you compete with others on the same stage? No matter how he thought about it, he could only come to a conclusion. If he were to encounter Gwashuk in this culinary demon trial, then he could prepare for GG in advance. If he surrendered, he would lose half the battle. At the very least, he wouldn't fall to the point of jumping into the pot to embarrass himself. Even after the pot of oil had turned cold, Zhu Jian was still unwilling to come out of the pot. It was simply too embarrassing and embarrassing. There was nothing more humiliating than failure. If he were a few years younger, Mr. Johnny might have cried out of anger. If he wasn't careful and Miss Ji ended up in the same situation, his plan to create a smuff would be ruined. Feeling the immense pressure, even the drumstick in his mouth didn't taste as good. He gnawed on it mechanically, until Maki, who was next to him, made a sound of panic. Ah, Miss Ji hair. She looked at Tsuko's head in shock. Her light green hair had turned fiery red, and wisps of flames were rising. She couldn't believe it. It's burning. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. Should she quickly take off her shirt to put out the flames? It was a piece of cake. Huaisher raised his eyes and glanced at the top of his head. He casually stroked it twice with his fingers, and the flames were extinguished. However, the scorching heat was still there, and it could reignite at any time. Then, he lowered his head and continued eating. Exxon fried chicken set, or in other words, super large plate of oil tempura. Yes, that's right. When she left, she took away the leftover turkey from Zhu Zhijian. At that time, she even politely asked for Zhu Zhijian's opinion. Then, Zhu Zhijian, who was in the pot of oil, looked at the ceiling helplessly and waved his hand indifferently. And so, Miss Huaizhi carried the 9 huge paper boxes that were even taller than her and went home. As he ate, the top of his head was on fire. It was as if he was swallowing a bomb. He felt this incomparably terrifying impact. He had personally experienced Zhu Zhijian's powerful strength. It was said that he had even more powerful dishes. The most famous industrial cuisine was the Detroit family bucket. However, Huaisher probably wouldn't be able to see it. It was hard to say if Zhu Zhijian would have the courage to pick up a kitchen knife again in a short period of time. But this chicken box was really amazing. Huaisher ate mouthful after mouthful, and his entire body emitted a terrifying amount of heat. Wisps of pungent black smoke rose from the top of his head. Even the sound of his breathing was mixed with the sound of steel rubbing against each other. In the dream cage, those crows cawed excitedly, bathing in the curses and disasters that came from young Master Ming's sacred mark. Their iron-like bodies seemed to be burning red as well. When they flapped their wings, a series of fire sparkles were brought up. As expected of industrial cuisine, there was a lot of food. This huge amount of malice and madness made all the crows eat very happily. If it was the boiled cabbage from the boiling water trial, he would probably be able to get more food, right? However, Huaisher really wasn't interested in other people's bathwater. It was too disgusting. Thinking of that old ghost, Huaisher couldn't help but sigh again. Miss Huaisher, are you worried about meeting that Mr. Guo in the next duel? Under the silent moonlight, Zhanxi's voice suddenly came from his side. She asked curiously, "That person, is he very powerful?" Huaisher nodded. He didn't know how to explain it to her. Not only was he very powerful, he was so powerful that it made people's hair stand on end. For example, it was like the final boss suddenly appeared at the door of the beginner's village. He was terrifyingly powerful. But there's no need to fight, right? Zhanxi asked curiously. Miss Huaisher, didn't you say that we have an agreement with Cousin Hupa? If we meet that person, can't we just admit defeat? Huaisher was stunned. Zhanxi was right. In fact, he didn't have to fight with Washuk at all. After all, he had a secret deal with Hupa from the beginning. They were completely fake. If they met Guashuk, wouldn't it be better to just admit defeat? The answer was of course not. In the silence, Huaisher's expression changed. However, he didn't feel relieved because of this realization. Instead, he felt even more disappointed. After witnessing that old guy's duel, he had already thrown the fake duel to the back of his mind. In other words, he didn't have time to think about other things besides how to defeat him. He couldn't help but be influenced by that crazy and pure willpower. He felt a completely different attraction from the chef's duel that he didn't care about in the past. He saw Guashuk as a strong enemy. Challenging such an enemy, no matter if he won or lost, he wouldn't regret it. Even if he was defeated so easily that he didn't have the courage to pick up cooking utensils and give up on being an abyss chef, it would be better than this. He wanted to win. Even if the chance was slim, he wanted to overestimate himself and fight with all his might. Just like a real chef. Although it's not good to say this, I think. Miss Huaisher won't lose to anyone in a real duel. In the silence, the girl who was walking beside him suddenly spoke. Full of trust and longing, she stared at his side profile, which was covered in oil and chili powder, and said confidently, "Because Miss Huaisher is definitely the strongest." For a moment, he was stunned. Huaisher didn't know what kind of answer to give. Should he be moved or ashamed? After a long time, he laughed silently. He reached out his hand to rub her hair, and conveniently wiped his hand twice in the midst of the girl's distressed complaints. Then, he continued to bury his head and eat. He was full of motivation. Since she trusted him so much, he couldn't drag her down. Even if he couldn't win against Gwashuk, he couldn't lose to any other random characters, right? In short, let's do our best first. The result was that Huaishir ate all 9 boxes of oil tempura alone. All of them. Even Jiao Zhijian couldn't believe it when he saw it. After all, this was physically impossible. The 9 boxes of tempura together weighed more than 10 kilograms, not to mention the industrial toxins that were processed in batches. For Gwashuk's special edition, even a single chicken wing contained the pneumoconiosis curse, heavy metal particles, and even elementium pollution, which was equivalent to the output of an entire steel mill for a month. Relying on his strong resistance to abyss corrosion and toxins, as well as sharing the burden with the crows, it took him a full 6 hours to finish all of it. Now he felt that his entire body had become the shape of oil, and everything looked like an engine and a spark plug. Even a burp could cause a large mouthful of smoke to come out of his mouth. And the detoxification of the forger's furnace was still ongoing. Now, the heavy metal in Huaishir's blood had seriously exceeded the limit, thousands of times higher than the safety limit. Normally, an ascendant wouldn't even talk about eating so much. Eating 1 box would probably turn them into iron and stone. Under the control of the sealing hand, piece after piece of rust peeled off from Huaishir's skin. He had shed 2 layers of skin, and his fingernails had grown back 4 or 5 times. He had also lost about 10 kilograms of hair. His body temperature was still hovering around 40 degrees Celsius, and there were still strands of red in his newly grown hair. It would probably take him an entire day to completely digest all of it. On the other hand, after the crows shared so much of the negative elementium, they were all incredibly excited and full of energy as if they had taken stimulants. Beneath the metal wings, the countless gears, springs, and machinery that formed their bodies were covered in a layer of blue oil, as if they had been thoroughly lubricated and maintained. They were in incredibly good condition. It was rare for them to be able to eat their fill, and Huaishir didn't let them down. It seemed that he had grown quite a bit. However, the price was that even Huaishir had become restless. He had nowhere to vent the massive amount of energy in his body, and it was as if a flame was burning his soul. His eyes were burning red. He longed to vent to his heart's content and to do some intense post-meal exercise. He raised his eyes and looked at the night sky outside the window. What a beautiful moonlight! He let out a low hum. Chapter 636. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Zhenshi woke up with a start from her dream. She heard someone knocking on her door. It was filled with anxiety and impatience. When she opened the door, she saw Miss Huaiji, who was completely different from what she had expected. She was still a beautiful woman, but now she was filled with an unsettling sense of threat. Her eyes were bloodshot and scarlet. Her long hair danced slightly like flames. Miss Huaiji, she froze on the spot and suddenly felt a little scared. Huaishir raised his hand and typed on his phone. "I need to vent." "Eh," the girl exclaimed and took a step back. She was stunned and in disbelief. I know." After a long time, she seemed to have made up her mind. Her expression finally calmed down, as if she had finally made up her mind. She straightened her neck and closed her eyes. Please. I don't have much experience. Please be gentle." "Eh." Huaishir's eyes widened. He was so scared that he almost screamed. "What the hell? I just wanted to tell you that I'm going out, that's all. What are you thinking?" She closed her eyes and shivered like a little quail. Soon, he felt something hard being placed in his arms. It was heavy, huge, and scalding hot. It was like a small coal stove, and it was making noises. When she opened her eyes, she saw a crow looking at her with its head raised. Then there was a second crow, a third, a fourth, until hundreds of crows occupied the entire courtyard. "I'm going out. They will protect you." She was stunned for a long time. She widened her eyes and screamed again. She reached out and grabbed Miss Huaiji's wrist. She looked nervous. Girls can't be so casual. "Miss Huaiji, the most precious thing must be given to the person you love when you get married. If you have to do that, then come at me." Huaishir felt that he had been turned upside down. Little sister, there's something wrong with you. What are you thinking? With your body, if I punch you, you might cry until the end of the chef's duel. He rolled his eyes and sighed. He typed again. I'm just going to find someone to fight. Dead silence. An awkward, dead silence. Hina's pale face quickly turned red, and a strange whimper came from her throat, as if she was about to faint. I'm not, I didn't. She really wanted to say that she wasn't a shameless woman whose mind was filled with dirty things, but she didn't know how to explain it. She only wanted to shrink her head into a sand dune and hope that a lightning bolt would suddenly fall from the sky and strike her to death. Just think of it as me going out to buy an orange. Amidst the chaos, she felt a hand on her hair. The hand ruffled her hair and told her, "Stay in the bedroom. Don't move." She was stunned by the sudden impact. "Miss YG, you spoke to me?" It was indeed the same as she had imagined, a mature voice with a hint of hoarseness and gentleness. But it was too vague and indistinct, as if it was very far away, and he couldn't hear it clearly. Yes, that's right. That's Motoko's voice. After devouring so many calamities, young Arbiter Ming's reflection had more or less grown, although this growth didn't seem right. Could it be that Tongi, that bad girl, did something in there again? Why did that voice sound so similar to hers? Huaishir sighed, took a step back, and waved goodbye to the girl. He turned around and disappeared into the darkness. In the silence, among the blinking crows, Hina was still stunned, staring blankly at Miss Huaiji's back as she left. She pressed down on her hair that she had just ruffled. She didn't know why, but her face was red and hot. But she still didn't understand what had happened. She actually felt a little regretful. Miss Huaiji was very hot. Miss Huaiji needed to vent, and then Miss Huaiji knocked on her door in the middle of the night. Then, shouldn't the next scene be Miss Huaiji violently pouncing on her and doing all sorts of unspeakable things to her? As she thought about it, she couldn't help but giggle. Then, she suddenly felt her nose heat up and blood flowed out. Too exciting. 3 minutes later, on the other side of Riken's Manor, in an empty and quiet tea room. Outside the tea stove, an old man who was sitting cross-legged suddenly raised his eyebrows, glanced towards the north, and smiled strangely. She's gone. He made a move just like that. Hooper raised his eyebrows. This doesn't seem like his style. I thought he would keep touching until the end and be too lazy to get involved in this trouble. She's gone, that's right. Guashuk picked up the teacup, sipped the dark tea, and took a deep breath. Although my sense of smell is delayed and my sense of taste is incomplete, but this old man's sense of hearing is still at its original level. There are 2 heartbeats missing in the manor, and they flew to the sky. Should be the location of Miss Hina's courtyard. 2. Hoopa couldn't believe it. Are you sure it's 2? He still has Miss Hina with him? No, Miss Hina's heartbeat is still there. Guashuk drank the tea in the cup and laughed strangely. There's another heart in his body, another heart that doesn't belong to him. Parasite or curse? It's neither. Guashuk shook his head. That's a blessing that this old man has never seen before from the abyss. No, it should be a blessing comparable to the gods. Although I don't know how big of a disaster this heavy blessing will attract. But for Miss Hina, it shouldn't be a problem. That guy, Hoopa sighed angrily, not knowing whether it was out of unhappiness, jealousy, or helplessness. After shaking her head, she looked down at the time on her phone. Calculating the time, Yishui should be in the capital by now. Missy always likes to do unexpected things. Maybe she's already in Osaka or Edo. But she probably won't get involved in the matters here in Nara. I always feel that Yishui is the kind of person who likes to meddle in other people's business. That's right, but how do I put it? Guashuk thought for a moment, then said, for example, that child doesn't like to eat someone else's treat. Instead, he likes to organize his own meal. Him being willing to come this time is already giving Xian Yao face. Is it really okay to tell me this kind of thing? Why can't I tell you? Guashuk asked back in confusion. As the person in charge here in Nara, of course you should know these things. Make the plan clear, and let the people who do the work know it clearly. Even if they have to die as a last resort, they should know what they are sacrificing for. Although Xin Yao is a stingy old man, he's always been generous to the younger generation. The company's atmosphere is really friendly. Hoopa shrugged, not knowing whether he should feel honored or resentful. The benefits are not bad. Guashuk grinned, revealing a mouth full of loose teeth, and smiled very happily. The hairtail this old man makes every year is very delicious, right? Dead silence. Hoopo's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. You? That's right, the Dongxia's dried hairtail is all imported from me. Is that strange? I even specifically told them to give you the biggest share. Don't tell me Chu Hongshun took it for himself? After a long silence, Hoopa looked away. The seaweed is not bad. Haha, this old man will get you more later. Guashuk laughed happily, put down the teacup, and got up to leave. When people were old, they had to take care of their health and couldn't stay up late like before. After washing up, they should go to bed at 5 o'clock. This old man had always been good at taking care of his health. But before he left, he turned back and asked, "Staying up late will hurt your stomach. Do you want me to cook some porridge for you?" Hoopa wanted to say no, but the porridge he cooked was too fragrant, so she could only nod. Watching the old man leave, she sighed, picked up her phone, and dialed the number of tomorrow's news editorial department. Soon, a female voice picked up. "Hello, who is it?" I see Hoopa." She shook her head helplessly. "This is the mountain. There are no vending machines around. Is the phone not good?" The female voice instantly became serious. "Miss Hoopa, the phone has radiation." Hoopa was speechless, only feeling that she would never come out. "What radiation? You are tomorrow's news." Would she still believe in this mess of old people's pseudoscience? Maybe in order to guard against the brain control of the Astronomy Society, these people wear tinfoil hats every day. Let me see. According to the special news service you ordered, yes, the first page of information on the key people in Nara City has already been compiled. The sound of tapping on a keyboard came from the other end of the phone. Immediately after, he sighed and said, "Amazing, amazing. Right now, the city of Nara is gathering. At this critical moment, there are more than 400 ascendants wandering around the city. Not only are there Ingzhou people, there are also many foreigners. There are even more wanted criminals. What are you doing? Fighting the Holy Grail War? What's the Holy Grail War?" The woman on the phone was stunned for a long time. "You don't know?" "No. Don't you Ingzhou people watch anime?" "Forget it. Back to the topic. There are more than 80 people with a threat level of B or above. What about those related to my relatives?" "That's not a small number." The sound of typing on a keyboard could be heard. Brother Knight, due from the enraged groups, Thermal Union from Edo, Unclean Monk Coin from the Cloud Nation, Million Gold Bruce from Africa, Dustin the Hammer, Nathan the Ice Stone, Zatoichi the Sixth, Yiksha Uchi from Shinano. Say, is Nara really alright? Is it okay to be so lively? It will be even more lively before daybreak. Hoopa sighed faintly. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, "I have a piece of information for you." "HM? Exclusive news? I like it." The woman tapped on the keyboard. "Name? Age? Gender? Be more specific. I can give you a discount." "Let me think." Hoopa couldn't hide his bad taste, and finally thought of a nickname. It's information related to the headless witch white paper Motoko. Soon, after a short exchange, a regretful voice came from the other end of the phone. "This news is D rank. It's okay. When the price rises to A rank tomorrow, just remember to pay." Ignoring the other party's doubts, Hoopa happily hung up the phone. In the silence, the kneeling samurai girl narrowed her eyes and stared at the night sky outside the window. It was as if she could see Nara, who was immersed in the deep night sky, through the tall wall in the forest, as well as through the long distance. The bloody battle hidden under the turbulent water surface, and the depth charge that was about to fall from the sky, causing terrifying waves. When that time came, everyone's expressions would be very interesting, right? Chapter 637. It was 4:45 in the morning. In the quiet night, the pale moonlight shone through the gaps between the dark clouds, faintly illuminating the corners of the ancient city of Nara. The bustling city during the day was now completely silent. In Yingzhou, except for a few cities, the difference between day and night was so clear. Except for the capital, Kyoto, and the trade center of Edo, it was difficult to see any other business after 6 o'clock in the morning other than a 24-hour convenience store. The only places with lights on were the izakaya that was open late at night. As for the rest of the world, everything else had fallen into silence and darkness. It was like a deliberate division, turning the deep night into a forbidden zone for those who couldn't understand. When the starlight was blocked, the world was dark. Now, who knew how many ascendants were wandering in the darkness, searching for every trace under the huge bounty? Unlike the laissez-faire of the looming hall, the charm of money was too terrifying. For the power and wealth that the Riken family represented, the price they had to pay now was but a drop in the ocean. The generous candidates had been throwing money out in an endless stream these past few days, casting a net to recruit any experts who wanted to be hired. If the quality wasn't enough, quantity would make up for it. Just by looking at the huge bounties and the huge number of participants on the collection of 10,000 sins, one could understand what kind of hunting ground Nara had become in the dark night. In the dead silence, the night was broken by the roar of a motorcycle engine. The darkness was illuminated by the huge headlights, like a burning flame. They openly passed through the city, not hiding their existence. That was undoubtedly a sound that every Yingzhou person was familiar with. The biker gang. The roar of the engine was accompanied by excited laughter. Big brother, look, I caught another one." On the huge, heavy motorcycle, there was a majestic flag that flapped in the wind. The young man sitting on the motorcycle had a rather cool and exaggerated blonde hair. He wore sunglasses and dragged a chain in his hand. He was dragging a person who had been scraped on the ground until it was a bloody mess. He was excitedly showing it to his brother, who was squatting at the entrance of the park. The clothes of the two brothers were exactly the same, and they were filled with Buddhist scriptures and other unknown words. However, the thick ink characters that represented their names on the back were completely different. On the back of the golden-haired little brother was written "Boiling Might," while on the back of the burly big brother with fluttering black hair and heavy makeup of a heavy metal musician was written "Bloody Night's Sorrow." The infamous Berserk duo from the Fire Lightning Association, the Speed brothers who dominated Kanagawa, had arrived at the ancient capital of Nara. But when the eldest brother lowered his head and looked at the person being dragged over by the iron chain, he frowned. "This isn't right. He looks so embarrassing. He doesn't look like a murderer. Barney, you idiot. Look carefully, this guy is using a gun. If he uses a gun, he can't even cut a chicken's neck with a knife. How can he kill people with it?" With that, he pulled out a pistol from the guy's pocket and threw it into the trash can. Barney Boilingway was stunned for a long time and found it hard to accept. "But, big brother, look at this guy. He's worth some money, right? He's a piece of trash. He can't be exchanged for money." The Bloody Night's Sorrow pinched his cigarette and sighed helplessly. "It's already the 6th one. Barney, don't catch him randomly. The employer won't pay. Hurry up and throw it away. Throw it away. Throw it where? Just find a trash can. Forget it. Throw it into the river. It's too troublesome to sort the trash. Don't trouble the cleaners. Also, don't spit everywhere." And the big brother suddenly paused for a moment. He raised his head abruptly and looked into the darkness. His expression gradually became gloomy. "Did you bring someone back?" Barney was stunned and shook his head frantically. When he turned around, he saw the huge shadow. It was right under the flickering street lights. Namo. He was like a human-shaped mountain. He wore a bamboo hat on his head, and the kasaya on his body had been dyed scarlet. As if he was delivering the souls of the dead, he raised one hand in front of his chest and lowered his head to chant scriptures. In his other hand, he held a mace that was as tall as an ordinary person. The heavy and thick iron mace was covered with sharp protrusions that looked like teeth. It seemed to be dotted with wisps of golden paint, which made the blood-red color look even more vivid. When the bamboo hat was slowly raised, it revealed the sharp horns that grew crookedly on his forehead, as well as the greenish-purple, ferocious smile. At that moment, the expressions of the two brothers gradually turned cold. The impure monk Guoying. Go away, fatty. This isn't the area you're in charge of. The big brother slowly stood up and pulled out a baseball bat that had been hammered with countless nails from behind him. He spat on the ground. Don't you even know how to be polite? Everywhere in the world is the land of Buddha. Is there any place that this humble monk can't go? The burly monk, who looked like a devil, took a step forward and carried his ghost gold mace. The blood in his smile spread. This humble monk came here specially to pray for the two benefactors. Benefactors? The big brother grinned. A cold smile appeared on his thick Gothic makeup. The baseball bat in his hand shot out lightning. I don't have anything to give you. Don't you still have your life? The ghost monk Guiying laughed sharply. The muscles under his blood-stained monk robe bulged. Let this humble monk send the two benefactors to the Western paradise. Namo become Buddha. At that moment, following Guiying's roar, a violent roar suddenly spread out. The body that was as huge as a mountain broke through the air without any warning. Its speed was unbelievably fast. The ghost gold mace in its hand had already smashed a shocking depression in the ground. But the moment the iron mace smashed down, a motorcycle with lightning speed had already appeared out of thin air. It carried the Goth biker brothers, broke through the hurricane, and advanced at full speed. It rose up along with the ghost gold mace. The net weight of 2 tons, coupled with its terrifying speed and power, all rolled onto Guiying's face along with the crazily spinning wheels. The bamboo hat was shattered. The huge impact caused the burly ghost monk to take 3 steps back. But his face was still ferocious and bloodthirsty. Wisps of blood-red light constantly seeped out of the sharp horns on his forehead. The 3 treasures of Namo, convert. Guiying laughed strangely and looked around at the biker brothers. Today is a good day for the 2 benefactors to become Buddhas. As the motorcycle galloped, the 2 brothers' huge vehicles had already reached the 2 ends of the square. The chain and the bat were aimed at Guiying from afar. Car splitter, car splitter, car splitter. Barney twisted the accelerator excitedly and roared excitedly. Fire and lightning will night, Duke Bitter Brothers, Blood Knight, Sorrow Ghost, Exploding Cooking Way, fair and square, join in. Let go AIBO. The Goth biker brothers coldly growled. An electric light burst forth. The overlapping loud sounds of the engines turned into thunder and soared into the sky. Rampage Scamper was about to begin, but at that moment, everyone's movements came to an abrupt halt. They were frozen in place. Frozen, because a sharp sound rang out from above the vault of heaven. The ear-piercing sound overlapped in one place, ravaging everyone's eardrums and spreading in all directions. It was the high-pitched chirping of birds. Like countless metals rubbing against each other, they swept across the sky, and the wind whistled. From the street lamps, from the eaves, from the treetops, from the high-voltage cables, they appeared from all directions, unknowingly. The entire square was surrounded by countless blackbirds. Those huge crows' bodies glowed with a metallic light. Their scarlet eyes looked down, full of hunger and mockery. This place was already under the gaze of the flock of crows. Then, above the gloomy sky, the thin starlight and the incomplete moon disappeared without warning, because something drifted over from afar, above the vault of heaven, and swallowed all the light, right above their heads. A shadow that constantly changed shape emerged. Rolling darkness surged, appearing from a higher place in the vault of heaven, and rapidly descending. Like a blazing meteorite, after cruelly destroying the sky, it cast the shadow of disaster. Just by staring, one could feel the terrifying darkness that came from the abyss. Even if one closed their eyes, they could feel the malevolence behind them. At that moment, the endless darkness suddenly dissipated. It was replaced by a figure that was falling toward the ground, carrying flames. It broke through the layers of hurricanes and finally descended from the sky. Countless clouds of dust flew up. In the tremor of the earth, a pale white skeleton-like figure emerged from the center of the square, with a few strands of scarlet long hair flying in the wind, as if it was burning. She stood in the shadow for a long time. Her eyes that were lit by the flames looked around. She looked at her opponents around her. The corner of her mouth curled up in a happy arc. First time a crow is on a plane. It's really fast. A soft and hoarse voice echoed in the square. I'm not late, right? Big brother, look. In the midst of his shock, Barney could not help but exclaim, pointing at the figure that descended from the sky, and shouted at Big Brother Goth. What a beautiful woman. Can I go and ask for her number? Are you an idiot, Barney? Shut up. Blood Knight's sorrow pressed his head. This is not a place for you to strike up a conversation. Under the illumination of the flickering street lights, the shadow slowly dissipated, revealing a stunning face, as well as a pair of eyes that were already filled with scarlet red. In his hand, the sharp sound of steel rubbing against each other sounded again. Countless steel feathers gathered in the air, overlapping into a complicated blade pattern. The hatred that gathered into a substance turned into a bloody light, flowing between the blades, emitting a piercing aura of brutality. Don't be afraid. I came here just to fight with you. Huaishir explained gently. If you're afraid, then run away. Remember to tuck your tail between your legs. I won't stop you. Faster than him was the roar from Ghost Monk. His huge body broke through the air without any warning. After crossing a distance of dozens of meters, his huge body had already shrouded Huaishir in the shadow. On his head, a second sharp ghost horn broke out his flesh, causing the brutality of his aura to increase tenfold. Namo, Karma, who had fallen into madness, laughed wildly. Convert to Buddhism, convert to monk, convert to Dharma, convert to Buddha. In his hand, the huge ghost gold staff had already been swung from behind his shoulder to forward, tearing through the fragile air, setting off a violent wind, and smashing down. Just the wind pressure made the stone slabs on the square fly up like thin paper. And the ghost gold staff, which was covered with sharp teeth, had already surpassed the speed of wind, breaking through the limit of the speed of sound and stepping into the realm of Mach. This was no longer a level that humans could reach. It was the power of a ghost, through and through. In the face of this attack, the flesh and blood body was not worth mentioning. The ground roared, the square cracked, and the whole ground suddenly sank. The broken water pipes broke through the broken ground like a waterfall, spewing out mud. Then, the spreading aftershock was cut into pieces by the brutal blade. The blade of resentment broke through the engulfing hurricane, and with a swift slash, a crack suddenly appeared on Ghost Monk's monastic robe. Foul-smelling blood gushed out like spring water. It was so deep that the bone could be seen. However, that lightning-fast slash didn't manage to cut off his arm, only leaving behind a terrible wound. It could not damage his bones that had transformed into a Sariris state. Instead, it was injured by the rebound force. Retreat in front of my golden body that has been blessed by Buddha, you evil woman of the outer path. Guang scrutinized the slender figure in front of him. He raised his ghost gold staff again and grinned without pity. If you surrender quickly, I can convert you and let you ascend to nirvana. Ha ha, ha ha. Without any mercy, he smashed down. The high-pitched sound of metal colliding spread, and sparks burst out. But this time, Gui Ying's expression stiffened. But it was blocked. The indestructible ghost gold staff was actually stopped in midair. It was blocked by the slender blade, and was unable to smash down even half an inch. That's it. Huaishir raised his head and looked at Gui Ying's stunned face. On the arm that he used to hold the blade, the skin that had been cracked by the shock seeped out wisps of sticky blood, but the blood did not fall to the ground. Instead, it went against gravity and went up along the arm, finally being swallowed by the greedy blade. The ghost gold staff growled, and wisps of pungent smoke spread out. That was the disaster left behind in the industrial cuisine, the terrifying heat hidden under the shell. Now, with the operation of the source substance, it rose from the sacred mark, urged by the curse, turned into flames, and spewed out. It enveloped Huaishir's figure. He was burning. Staring at the enemy in front of him, he smiled. It's my turn. Chapter 638. Flames began to rise. As the sword and the ghostly gold staff clashed, the flames covered the beautiful face inch by inch, swallowing up the woman's figure. She was burning, but she also seemed to be very pleased, as if this was how it should be. It was just, after tearing off her disguise, she was releasing her true nature. She wanted to burn away all beauty and flirtatiousness, leaving behind only the savagery of walking towards destruction. In that instant, a sense of unease appeared in Gui Ying's heart. He could feel the enormous power surging beneath the ghostly gold staff. Ah, shameless bastard! The golden-haired biker in the distance was enraged. He waved his chains and roared, filled with righteous indignation. He's gone too far. He actually dared to pour gasoline on such a beautiful woman. Wake up, Barney. No one dares to pour gasoline on something like that. The Blood Knight Sorrow Demon's expression froze. Only sweat dripped down from his forehead, almost ruining his heavy metal singer makeup. He found it hard to believe the scene in front of him, and he also found it hard to believe his own guesses. That's a burst of power. That's right. It was literally fire. Power. All. Open. The darkness within the flames surged, rioting. A huge explosion rang out. The sword was pushed upwards inch by inch, actually pushing back the heavy, ghostly gold staff. The enormous power that erupted in an instant caused the stone floor beneath the ghost monk's feet to be unable to withstand the excessive force. It shattered, and his enormous body slid backwards. The burning blade of hatred chased after him, slashing forward. A deep gash appeared on the ghost monk's distorted face, almost destroying one of his eyes. Gwyn cried out in pain. He waved the ghostly gold staff around wildly, staggering backwards. However, Huaisher didn't chase after him. He just stood in place, opened his mouth, and a stream of origin substance surged out from his nose and mouth. I've seen this before. It's Godzilla. Barney still hadn't reacted. He excitedly tugged on his brother's sleeve. Brother, look, it's Godzilla. A nuclear monster. Can actually turn into a woman. Motherf asterisk her. The Blood Knight Sorrow Demon felt like he was about to go crazy. He envied his brother's boldness from the bottom of his heart. Can't you see, Barney? From the beginning until now, that monstrous woman had not even used her full strength. She was just playing with her prey, standing where she was. Huaisher stared at the enemy not too far away and couldn't help but sigh in fear. That was close. Just now, he almost subconsciously used steps and drummer to chase after him. Wouldn't he be exposed then? The effect of the overload state was internal, and there were no clues from the outside, so it could be used secretly. However, regardless of whether it was Drummer's Heaven's Collapse or Use Step's Shrinking Ground, they were all signature techniques. Not to mention that there was only one Xiong Dragon Cord in the world. Once he used his other signature weapons and moves, he would be exposed. Ever since he returned from Hell, the news of Crow's transformation was still sealed within the teaching and research room and was not known to outsiders. After all, it was the legacy of the Sun Maker, and it was kept a secret from the outside world. However, if he dared to pull Beelzebub out and shoot him, 2 hours later, the local astronomy association in Angzhou would probably invite him for a 10-day trip to the hot springs in the mountains. Fortunately, if it was just the playing method, outsiders would not be able to tell at all. However, the problem was he was not good at using Ingzhou's knives. He lowered his head and looked at hatred in his hand. He shook his head regretfully. It was not that he was completely clueless, but he instinctively knew how to use knives and weapons of this length. He used the most common mechanical method to control them. Other than that, he did not know anything. Sword Zen, residual heart, folding feet, chi fusion, and reverse cutting. Not to mention the specialization, profoundness, and ultimate skills of this and that. In this way, there would be no difference even if he changed the weapon in his hand to an iron rod, a sword of virtue, or an axe. What a pity. He casually waved the blade in his hand and walked forward step by step, approaching his opponent. It was fine if he didn't know how to use it, as long as he used it as something else. Bang! A loud sound suddenly exploded in the air. The ghost goldenrod's sweep was actually defeated by Huaishi's wave. It shook violently, as if it was about to fly out of Karma's hand. It buzzed. It was as if Huaishi was not swinging a sword at all, but rather a terrifyingly heavy hammer. It was hard to believe. Just a casual wave was enough to set off a hurricane. The blade whistled through the air, as if it were a heavy object. But immediately afterwards, it became light and nimble, silent, like a dagger that did not make any sound at all. It had been a long time since he had used an origin substance. In the past, he had been able to add the weight of the axe of rage to his dagger, so it was not surprising that he was able to add the weight of the hammer of pain to the blade of hatred. It was just a simple way to use such a heavy and blunt weapon on the spot. In that moment of silence, the blade and the flames slashed through the air. The sound of the blade slicing through the air overlapped, as if it had become a powerful rhythm. It was an impassioned 4/4 beat. This was a strange illusion that only the person involved could experience. It was also something that Karma had never experienced in his entire life. If this burly ghost monk had ever walked into a concert hall and walked into a live performance, he would understand that this was just the prelude to the grand symphony, signaling the arrival of a storm. Huaishi cut the song. The performance was about to begin. At that moment, the corner of Karma's eyes suddenly twitched, as if a cold wind was blowing in his face. For no reason, and it was so difficult to understand, he actually heard an illusory roar. This was a dangerous omen brought by intuition. Did you hear that? Suddenly, a hoarse and low voice sounded in his ear. That's the loud sound that announces the arrival of dawn. As the blade was raised, the burning figure stepped forward step by step. Unknowingly, she was already very close to him. She was clearly so thin and slender compared to the burly ghost monk, but she seemed to be looking down at him from above. Perhaps she had said something else, but Karma, who was in shock, did not hear it clearly. He only heard the last two words. She said, "Stand still." At that moment, a loud sound burst forth. A mighty roar suddenly swept out from her hand and spread out. Because the burning blade had been raised, held with both hands, aimed at his face, and slashed down. To sum it up, it was just the very common tang bamboo style in the way of sword. She raised her weapon, aimed at the enemy, and used all her strength to slash down from above. But now, when she held the hilt of hatred tightly, even the rising flames began to dance in panic. Before the grand melody that was about to be played, they retreated in horror. An unprecedented chill instantly enveloped Karma's soul, causing him to hold up the ghost gold staff with both hands without hesitation and block in front of him. Then, his vision turned black. It was as if he had been hit head-on by a truck. He was shocked by the enormous power that erupted in an instant. He could not believe that the short figure actually contained such a terrifying, full-strength attack. The ghost gold staff let out a shrill cry and trembled. But this terrifying attack was blocked by him in the end. As a martial monk of Mount High, an evil spirit who had fallen into the way of the impure, the method of fighting had long been engraved into his instincts. There was no need to think. The next step was to seize this short gap and counterattack. He used his hands, feet, fists, and trampled. He used his 5 fingers to grab her head and then violently crush it. Then he used the ghost gold staff to completely smash her into meat paste. It should have been like this. It should have been like this. But now what was happening in front of him was completely different from what he had imagined. Because just after the violent attack ended, what waited for him was not the precious time to catch his breath, but another terrifying crisis. It was like moving clouds and flowing water. The blade that had been chopped down was raised again. Under the tight grip of both hands, he used all his strength to slash down again. The second attack, without any pause. The ghost gold staff shook violently and let out a wail. Cracks suddenly appeared on Karma's 10 fingers, and he trembled slightly. And just as the loud sound spread, without even leaving any room to catch his breath, he saw the blade raised for the 3rd time. It was raised high and aimed at his face. Slash! The third attack, a loud sound that was even louder than before, burst out again, and the shock spread. Karma suddenly felt a wave of intense dizziness and could not breathe. A trace of green also appeared on his ferocious face with two horns. He felt like he was about to suffocate. How was this possible? It was difficult to understand, and he could not understand. How could such a violent move exist? Why did the other party not have any gaps, and even the aura was not in disorder? It was as if he was not facing a human, but a steel object that was even stronger than a human. In that instant, he finally understood. From the violent figure in the flames, he glimpsed an invisible object. It was an unbelievably huge weapon, a huge cannon that was like the crystallization of war. Only the bombardment of the cannons could describe this unreasonable and terrifying impact. When the countless echoes of the loud sound extended to one place, reverberating in his hard bones and finally reaching his brain, it turned into an illusionary grand symphony melody. This was a legendary movement composed by Tchaikovsky to resist the invasion of Rome and praise the victory of the war to defend the country. With the mighty symphony, the tragedy and tragedy of the war were interpreted. In the end, with the sound of the cannon fire, the invaders were annihilated, and victory had arrived. Overture in E-flat major, 1812. Now, accompanied by the illusionary melody, the solemn cannon fire had begun. In the distance, the biker brothers from Edo were already intimidated by this terrible scene. Like an evil god descending from hell to the mortal world, the burning figure brandished the sword in his hand, and when he slashed, it burst forth with thunderclaps and loud sounds. 1 slash, 2 slashes, 3 slashes. The resounding screams overlapped and turned into the loud sound of a torrential downpour. Each strike caused a giant ghost body in front of him to tremble and be frightened, but the next strike would bring a brand new despair and haze. The cannon-like slashes were never-ending. Without mercy, without weakness, without any pause, the cruel heavenly punishment was meted out to the demon in front of him, until he was completely turned into ashes, crushed into dregs. Chapter 639. It had been a long time since he last played. It was so refreshing. After returning from the village of Dusk, he had almost never felt like this again. He tried his best to play and immersed himself in the melody. In this strange country, with a completely different identity from the past, he changed his appearance, brought his own musical instrument, faced the audience in front of him, and started anew from the streets and alleys. Just thinking about it made him excited. He couldn't help but get excited. As a result, he didn't notice the state of the opponent in front of him at all. It wasn't until the ghost gold rod suddenly broke in the wine that the distracted Huai Shi felt the change in the touch of his hand that he finally came back to his senses. He lowered his head and looked at the enemy in front of him. It was already over. On the ground, the half-kneeling evil ghost was already dripping with blood. His arms holding the ghost gold rod had long been broken and twisted, and the exposed bones were covered with cracks. After 3 minutes of bombardment, even the ghost monk, who was as tall and sturdy as a mountain, finally met his end. Long before the ghost gold rod broke, he had already lost consciousness. All that was left was this meaningless skeleton. Viscous blood quickly seeped out from his mouth, nose, and eyes. The pair of dull and empty eyes lifted up and stared at the figure in front of him. As the flames were extinguished, the face was revealed once again. With the last of his strength, his lips opened and closed with difficulty. Namo, the blade flashed. A head the size of a soccer ball rolled silently on the ground, accompanied by a fountain of blood gushing out. The darkness of the burial ground instantly swallowed everything. Soon, when the darkness dissipated, the wreckage full of disasters and miracles had already disappeared. Only the crows were chirping excitedly. Monk Bu Jing answered and became a Buddha. It could be said that it was Namo. Phew, it's finally a little refreshing. Miss YG took a step back and twisted her stiff neck. After venting all the evil fire in her body, she felt the coolness from the night wind, with the faint sweetness of blood, which made her feel refreshed. The woman raised her arm and wiped the sweat on her cheeks. When she looked back, she showed a sweet and terrifying smile to the two people in the distance. You're still here? Huaisher thought for a moment and shook off the blood on the blade. He asked seriously, then, do you want to come? Just like that, the invitation to the game was sent out. The World Blood Knight's sorrow ghost froze on the spot. He couldn't help but take a step back and squeeze the brakes. Barney, let's go. He gritted his teeth and whispered, that monster is not something we can deal with. But Barney, no. Exploding cooking way remained where he was. He stared at the enemy in front of him. After a long time, he retracted his gaze and looked at his big brother. But she's so strong, big brother. Exploding cooking way asked, is it really okay to leave like this? The World Blood Knight's sorrow ghost froze in place. Big brother, we are the Scamper Brothers of the Pyro Lightning Association. Boiling Way widened his eyes and raised his hand to flex his biceps. Are you going to run away with your tail between your legs when you see a powerful woman? Shouldn't the indomitable ghost rampage begin now? The expression of the Blood Knight's sorrow ghost changed from astonishment to ferociousness and determination. Resoluteness once again appeared on that heavily made-up face. TSK, you know how to say beautiful words now, Barney. Hey, it's all thanks to Big Brother's good teaching. Exploding cooking way was still smiling foolishly. The World Blood Knight's sorrow ghost took a deep breath. He squeezed the brakes with one hand, and the other hand crazily twisted the motorcycle's accelerator, causing his beloved motorcycle to roar excitedly. He made up his mind. I'll listen to you this time, Barney. Use that move, he said loudly. This time, you'll be the one in charge. Don't embarrass the Rampage brothers. Yes, that's right. Compared to his cowardly and retreating heart, this little brother who had always been courageous was the real Rampage man. Only a real man like him deserved to have such an awe-inspiring opportunity. Hey, really? Leave it to me? Exploding cooking way widened his eyes in disbelief. Immediately, he was ecstatic and laughed loudly. Oh, my soul is burning. Leave it to me, big brother, leave it to me. For the first time, he handed over the initiative and his own life to exploding cooking way. However, the World Blood Knight's sorrow ghost heart did not have any uneasiness or fear. Instead, it was filled with determination and trust. No matter how strong the enemy was, how unreachable the speed, how ferocious and terrifying the enemy was, he firmly believed that as long as the two brothers were together, they would have nothing to fear. Because the Rampage Brothers of the Pyro Lightning Association were invincible. The World Blood Knight's sorrow ghost was also laughing loudly. He was fearless. His eyes widened in the bursting lightning, and he twisted the accelerator all the way to the limit. Cuckoo, Xiangbang. At that moment, amidst the fearless laughter of the two brothers, the roar of the motorcycle resounded through the night sky. The steel engine was roaring, puffing out thick smoke, echoing the raging lightning fire in their hearts. The chain and the bat collided with each other, creating blazing electric sparks. Just like that, they charged towards the enemy in front. The gallop had begun. It was at that moment that a hurricane rushed towards them. The silence of the night was broken. The violent gallop was like a propeller, pulling the dead air and forming a restless storm. That's right, it was a storm. Accompanied by the gallop of the two people on the plaza, a terrifying air pressure difference was created. Immediately after, a huge amount of air began to flow from slow to rapid. In the end, it actually turned into a tornado that was visible to the naked eye. It was as if the sky and earth were galloping together with the two brothers, starting to go berserk. Huaisher was dumbfounded. Unbelievable. From the beginning, he could not keep up with the rhythm of the two brothers. Hey, are you two really speaking the language of Ingzhou? What the hell are you talking about? Also, these two people, one is brainless, the other is unhappy, but after joining forces, why are they so powerful? This was undeniably powerful. Two completely different origin substances fused together, rubbing against each other and bursting with wild lightning. When the two wills fused together, it was as if their souls were burning. The terrifying speed led to a storm, wreaking havoc on the plaza at a speed that was difficult for the naked eye to follow. Sand, dust, and water vapor formed a violent tornado, enveloping Huaishur within. Then it quickly contracted. It did not leave any room for him to escape. Pressing forward, not retreating, whether it was them or Huaishur himself, they were now forced by this huge force, and there was no way out. They must fight face to face and determine the victor. Ominous stars in the sky, men on the ground, bathed in lightning. The galloping blond man shouted excitedly. Stars scamper under our feet. Shame and righteousness. Go to death and go to love. The world blood knight sorrow ghost roared solemnly. The invincible legend of the Edo Fire and Lightning Society. The bitter night, do brothers, join in. Burn, berserk soul. The two crazy and fiery voices overlapped, turning into laughter. The galloping figures overlapped, turning into a solid lightning from the hurricane, causing the world to roar with anger. Imperial Sandsword, bitter night, do. The darkness, the night, the plaza, the alley, the earth, and the sky. Even Huaishur's eyes were illuminated by this bright golden light in an instant. This was the dazzling brilliance of the soul burning. In the same place, staring at the two brothers galloping towards him, Huaishur clenched the weapon in his hand. He couldn't help but smile at this attack that bet on the soul and life. This type of determination that was faster and freer than anyone else had already sublimated from their souls, turning into this true and genuine lightning radiance. Then, he could only go all out and return this attack of theirs. The stone slab under Huaishur's feet suddenly cracked, because the huge force had penetrated deep into the earth from the soles of his feet, like an iron stake, fixing him in place. Then, he raised his hands again, clenching the sonorous resentment. It was still the Tang Zhu style that was ready to strike. From the wound, a trace of blood slowly seeped out, but it did not fall. Instead, it inconceivably floated up, flying into the sky drop by drop. Under the collision of the origin substance and the sacred mark of both sides, even the environment here had a slight change. The two brothers, with their own determination, were actually able to affect the laws of physics in the present realm. Even the slightest influence was equivalent to prying open reality. Just feeling this, Huaishur was so excited that his blood was about to boil. Sure enough, coming out tonight was the right choice. Otherwise, he would not have met such a wonderful opponent. He would not have been able to enjoy such a hearty battle. At that moment, he raised his eyes and stared at the approaching lightning. There was only one chance, and he had to respond in a dignified manner, using his current full strength to strike. At that moment, the lightning was already close at hand. In this instant, as if time had stopped, Huaishur saw it. From the frozen hurricane and spreading lightning, he caught a glimpse of the two motorcycles that had already turned in a blazing light, and the two brothers on the motorcycles who had joined hands. They laughed boldly and fearlessly. As they charged forward, the chains in their hands began to glow with dazzling light. Different types of origin substances began to manifest on the chains, forming sharp, indestructible blades. This was a terrifying sure kill forged by the two brothers, and neither of them could be missing. With such an exaggerated impact and speed, even iron chains were superior to most weapons in the world. Even if there was an entire building in front of them, it would probably be cut in half like tofu. Right? That's right, this was the enemy's attack. At this moment, it was time to fight. The moment they were about to collide, the blade in Huaishur's hand screeched, and the feather patterns on the blade changed wildly. The flowing blood turned into light and shot out. Resentment slashed down toward the lightning. In the distant darkness, the bullet that had been waiting for a long time flew out, suddenly appearing first, toward Huaishur's eyes and the brain behind him. The cross engraved on the bullet was reflected in his eyes. It was already close at hand. Chapter 640. From the very beginning, they had been spying in the darkness. They had been attracted by the inconceivable explosions and witnessed such an inconceivable and violent scene. Their hearts were immersed in shock and trembling, and even they felt a long-lost excitement. They carefully concealed themselves and their auras, like a black cat strolling in the night. They held their breaths and waited. They withdrew all of their origin substances and even turned them into iron and stone. They hid, spied, and waited. They finally found this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. In that instant, the former Pharaoh's guard, the current bounty hunter, Bruce, nicknamed Million Gold, made his move. A golden bullet, worth as much as 1,000,000 gold, shot out from the muzzle of his gun. It was a sure kill shot. No matter how strong one's intuition was, they would not be able to detect this killing intent that had already been condensed into a crystal before they saw it. The moment the gunshot rang out, the result was already decided. The bullet was already inches away. Huaishi's blade slashed down. Immediately after, a boom swallowed everything. The lightning and the storm flashed and engulfed the thin figure. The terrifying thunder from the Berserk brothers enveloped everything. Dust rose into the air, and the storm spread out, sweeping in all directions. Immediately after, the ear-piercing sound of metal being twisted continuously rang out. It was as if something heavy was continuously rolling on the ground, and finally, it smashed into the pond in the plaza. It was 2 twisted motorcycles. There was also a stooped figure, Bloody Knight's sorrow ghost. In the collision, he was already covered in bruises. Who knew how many of his bones had been broken, and the wounds on his chest and back were countless. However, he still stubbornly protected his brother. He held the unconscious, exploding Shuwei in his arms. Even when he fainted, he did not let go. Bruce was stunned in place. It was hard to understand how this could happen. Immediately after, the storm filled with dust was cut apart, under the cold slash of a sharp blade. From the center of the collision, a slender figure slowly walked out. His long hair fluttered in the wind like flames. From a long distance away, his pitch-black eyes looked up like an empty abyss and stared at the attacker in the distance. Bruce's expression froze on his face, and the corners of his mouth twitched. He was actually unharmed. His cold eyes instantly saw through the layers of disguise and saw the dark-skinned, middle-aged man, and the shotgun in his hand. In the darkness, there seemed to be the meowing of countless cats. The fleeting silhouettes of the black cats circled around him, on his shoulders, feet, and even on his arms. This was the proof of being blessed by the cat god. Have we been discovered? The black man in the felt hat grinned, revealing a row of eye-catching and dazzling golden teeth. There is also an inelegant greeting branded on the golden teeth. This is a miscalculation. Even though the assassination had failed, he did not panic. Just like that, he calmly pulled the bolt, reloaded, and loaded another golden bullet. Then, he carried the shotgun on his shoulder and hooked his finger at Miss Huaiji. "Come on, lady. Let me see what you're capable of. How much bounty can your head be exchanged for?" Beneath his feet, the cats disappeared into the air one by one. Instead, a solemn and dignified vague shadow rose from behind him, as if looking at the world from the underworld, cold and ferocious. When the petite appearance of a cat was removed, what was revealed was the ferocious nature of a hunter-type animal. In the dead silence, Huaishi silently took 1 step forward, 2 steps, and even 3 steps. He walked towards the darkness where he was. The smile on Bruce's face became more mocking and ferocious. "It's coming." In the shadow under his feet, countless sharp outlines that only he could see emerged. In this long lurking, the darkness where he was had been set up into a dangerous area full of traps. It was a fortress belonging to the hunters. From the beginning, he was in an invincible position. At that moment, he heard Huaishi's sigh. "Idiot!" Then the sound of something breaking through the air flashed and disappeared. It burst out from Huaishi's hand and ended behind his ear. It was so fast and so exaggerated that he couldn't believe the scene he saw at this moment. In Huaishi's hand, the curved royal god saber, which was swinging at will, unbelievably grew. Bang! The blade of hatred, which was originally 4 feet long, instantly made the sound of steel roaring. It was the sharp sound of countless iron crystals multiplying. It welcomed the rapid extension as fast as light. It crossed over Bruce's meticulously designed trap and pierced through the muzzle of the shotgun. It easily tore through the barrel of the shotgun and slanted upwards, piercing through Bruce's jaw and entering his mouth. Then it cruelly continued upwards. It extended all the way from the felt hat at the back of his head. Why is it so long? Bruce's last thought dissipated in the darkness. Everything was over. The blood-colored curse of hatred and endless thirst spread out, and in an instant, all struggles ended. Then, the blade shrank back slightly by 2 inches, and as Huaishur stepped forward, sweeping, the clean and long-distance beheading was completed. The steel crows jumped down from the branches excitedly, and swept away with the darkness of the bone burial sanctum. Millions of gold Bruce disappeared from the world. Only the shotgun was left, which could barely be used as a voucher to exchange for the bounty. With the disappearance of the cat goddess's projection, the originally ambiguous darkness was instantly visible. Then, a mess of traps and mechanisms emerged from it. Huaishur's expression suddenly twitched. If he accidentally went in, he would probably lose a layer of skin even if he didn't die. Not to mention that there was an assassin like Bruce watching from the side. After dismantling the messy traps and picking up the shotgun on the ground, Huaishur turned back and looked at the end of the long street. "Mister, you've been watching for a long time, right? Do you want to fight?" In the darkness before dawn, the short figure stood on the street. His eyes drooped. The Ingzhou robe was wet with wet dew and dripped on the clogs of his feet. The slightly old man with a long sword looked short because his back was always stooped. If he could stand up straight, he must have a rare big body, right? However, seeing the staff in his other hand, he should be able to understand. He was blind. He didn't sense any horrible killing intent or blood. The blind swordsman was like an ordinary iron stone, quiet and calm. He didn't look like a murderer. It was better to say that he was more like a traditional warrior of Ingzhou than Sasaki, full of restraint and seriousness. Even if he was provoked by Huaishur's murderous intent, he didn't have any displeasure. He still nodded firmly and apologized. "I was just curious about the sound. I didn't mean to offend you. Please forgive me." After taking a few steps back, he turned and left. Both sides were at peace. Huaishur's palm was faintly wet. In the brief confrontation, he felt a wonderful pressure. The blind man with the sword was a rare strong man. There were not many people with such characteristics. Huaishur once heard it when chatting with Luo Lao in the orchard. The blind man with the sword could cause him such great pressure. He should be the Zatoichi in the description, although he didn't know which generation it was. Unfortunately, it was almost dawn and there was not enough time. Moreover, if the other party had no intention to fight, Huaishur would be embarrassed to entangle with him. It would be too funny if things went wrong. In this way, he carried the shotgun and turned back to the ruins of the square. He looked down at the 2 brothers who were leaning on the broken flower bed. He reached out and threw the shotgun to them. The World Blood Knight Sorrow was stunned for a long time and couldn't understand. "What do you want to do?" Boiling Way was also annoyed. "If you want to kill, just kill. Don't talk nonsense. Just take it as a thank you gift. It costs a lot of money to repair a car, right?" Huaishur turned back and looked at the crack on the ground behind him. The bent bat of the World Blood Knight Sorrow, and the bullet embedded in it. Huaishur had originally planned to use Shadow Burial Shuttle, but he didn't expect that the one who blocked the bullet for him in the end was his opponent. TSK, a man's duel should be fair and square. Boiling Way snorted unhappily. "Don't misunderstand. We're just despicable people who can't stand a sneak attack." "Where did you guys get these Thunder characters from?" Huaishur sighed. A hearty battle had been interrupted. It truly made people feel unhappy, and they wanted to continue. At that time, the pressure that the 2 brothers brought to him was really too pleasant. Unfortunately, sometimes the 2 pressures couldn't be stacked. Instead, they interfered with each other. Bruce's bullets had destroyed their tight alliance. It was like a third party who rudely intervened in the battle, causing a huge flaw to appear in the perfect combination of the 2 brothers. If he wanted to recreate it, there would be no second chance. Although he felt that there was something wrong with the 2 guys' brains, unexpectedly, he couldn't hate them. "It's over. Let's call it a day." Huaishur put away his sword and walked 2 steps. Suddenly, He turned back and asked, "By the way, how long have you been in Nara?" "1 week." "What's wrong?" Although exploding Cooking Way's tone was still sharp, he still chose to answer honestly. Do you know where to have breakfast nearby?" Miss Y Shiki scratched her head awkwardly and rubbed her small hands. "After fighting for so long, I've digested everything. I'm a little hungry, and I left in a hurry. I didn't bring any money." "Oh, that's great." Miss Y Shiki smiled brightly. "Please treat me." Was there a logic in this world that made people want to treat them after beating them up? Boiling Way's eyes twitched, and he started to feel that there was something wrong with this woman. However, looking at that sweet, smiling face, his heart couldn't help but beat wildly. Even though he knew that the other party was a threat, his heart still wavered. The women outside were too scheming. "Big brother, let's go back to Edo." Half an hour later, in the temporary office of the Nara news team of the Tomorrow News, the pale-faced woman lit a cigarette. Behind her glasses, the two dark circles under her eyes looked like pandas. She looked at the series of battle reports on the big screen and couldn't help but sigh with a headache. It was really like what Hoopa said. That guy was a woman with a paper bag. He really was a grade A? No, to be able to kill unclean monk Goying and Million Gold Bruce within an hour, as well as defeat the two hot-blooded berserk brothers who were completely different in style, this was already a beyond grade A. Terrifyingly strong. But why was there no record of such a strong ascender in their database? Could it be that she was smuggled in from the border or hell? That couldn't be right. Their database was directly connected to the Astronomical Association's customs, and they had countless intelligence channels. If there were any powerful characters in the world, they would know even earlier than the Central Bureau. Then why did they know nothing about her? Could it be that this woman jumped out from some stone in the ivory tower? Awesome. You bastards have gone too far in slacking. As the chief editor, she couldn't stand it anymore. She turned around and scolded her team members. "After so long, this is all you give me? Paper bag, female, 18 years old, a student of the ivory tower. And then, who are her parents? What's her blood type? What kind of stigmata, what kind of background? Where are the courses she enrolled in? Does she have a boyfriend or a girlfriend? What are her records in the Cooking Demon competition? Aside from the things that Hoopa handed over, there was nothing else to look at. There's no breaking news. How are you guys doing the news?" "There's nothing I can do." Chief Editor G, the team member who had stayed up all night, felt helpless. "Our team only has this much access to the data. We can't access the higher-level content, and the local investigation department can't find any clues. It's already not easy to find out so much." Just as the two of them looked at each other, a smug laugh came from the side. "Ho, ho, ho. Is it time for me to show off my skills?" The one who spoke was a man who was mopping the floor. He had his hands on his hips and laughed proudly. "I've already made a major breakthrough. Sure enough, it's time for the omnipotent detective to reveal the mystery." "Detective, can you stop fooling around?" The team member sighed helplessly. "You've only been here for less than 2 months. You haven't even gotten used to your job yet, so don't be in a hurry to show off. The news is very serious. This is tomorrow's news, detective. Don't joke around when it comes to work." Chief Editor Ji Kwong turned around and stared sternly at the guy her ex-boyfriend had introduced. She felt that they were jackals of the same tribe. They were both unreliable. "I'm not trying to show off." The detective pushed up his glasses and waved his fingers proudly. "I just found a clue that you guys didn't notice." Ji Kwong sighed. "Forget it. Let's not dampen this guy's enthusiasm. Whether it was a mule or a horse, it had to be brought out for a walk." Holding the hope that this guy might really find something, she waved helplessly. "Tell me about it first. If you really find something, I'll go through the formalities for you to become a full-time employee today. Then, next it's time to witness a miracle." The detective walked to the computer and quickly operated it. Then he put a brand new resume and file on the big screen, right next to Huai Jisu's file. The comparison was in the same place. In the silence, Ji Kwong's face twitched. "Who is this?" "Huai Shi, 18 years old. Male, Inspector of Asia, legendary investigator, Prince of Paradise, disaster musician." "Isn't it clearly written here?" The detective asked doubtfully. Don't you know? I know part of his file was even written by me. I know that you two used to know each other and are very close to you, Dongri. Please don't emphasize it anymore. Ji Kwang rubbed her eyebrows, troubled. But what does he have to do with Huai Jisoo? No, don't you think the two of them are very similar? The detective asked seriously, pointing to the two completely different but equally eye-catching faces on the file, and said seriously, when I first saw Huai Jisoo, I felt something was wrong. The more I looked at her, the more familiar she looked. It wasn't until just now that I remembered that she and Huai Shi are so similar. The corners of Ji Kwang's eyes twitched wildly, and she suppressed her thousands of question marks. How are they similar? The genders are completely different. How are they not similar? The detective argued in a loud voice. Look, Huai Jisoo is very beautiful, and Huai Shi is also very beautiful. Huai Jisoo is a cooking demon, and Huai Shi is also a cooking demon. Huai Jisoo is very good at swordsmanship, and Huai Shi is also very good at swordsmanship. Huai Jisoo likes to chop heads, and Huai Shi likes to chop heads. The more he spoke, the more excited the detective became, and his eyes shone with excitement. What's more coincidental is that the information said that Miss Huai Jisoo likes to seduce women, and so does Huai Shi. After that, he slammed the table and announced the results seriously. Q. E.D. Huai Jisoo is Huai Shi? Dead silence. Dead silence. Everyone in the office was dumbfounded. When they stared at the detective, they were full of admiration. Brother, how did you do such a fantastic idea? Even an experienced and knowledgeable chief editor like Ji Kwang couldn't help but admire the detective's outrageous reasoning that could be described as uncanny workmanship. At the same time, they were curious from the bottom of their hearts. How the hell did you have the nerve to call yourself a detective? After eliminating all the impossible options, the remaining one, no matter how incredible it is the truth. How is it? Isn't it amazing? Isn't it a genius deduction? The detective threw his head back and laughed heartily. He was so immersed in his great discovery that he didn't notice the awkward atmosphere around him. Ji Kwang raised his hand, pressed it to his forehead, and sighed to the sky. How stupid was he to hope that the detective would be able to find clues? You'd better go do odd jobs. Chapter 641. Tomorrow News in a higher-up office. The supervisor, who was wearing rimless glasses, was drinking coffee and listening to Ji Kwang's report. There was a hint of astonishment and amazement on his young face. That's a good idea. The supervisor put down his coffee cup and nodded in admiration. Huai Zisuko is Huai Shi. An interesting idea. We can send it to the entertainment department of the Asian section and accumulate it. It's enough to make an issue of gossip, although it's still not enough to make the headlines. There's nothing we can do about it. Everyone is waiting for news of His Majesty in Rome having an affair. The entertainment department really put a lot of pressure on the company. I just received 2 warnings from the Hall of Legislation. It's really hard to deal with. Interesting news. In other words, Ji Kwang already understood. In other words, you also think that it's purely groundless speculation? Not necessarily. What if it's right? Now that you mention it, I think it's quite likely. The supervisor chuckled and shook his head. However, perhaps there really is an intimate relationship between the two of them. Perhaps we shouldn't deny that there is a 1 in a million possibility. However, it's too unprofessional to combine the 2 characters into one just based on this kind of argument. This is not like a journalist. Ji Kwang, paparazzi can have no bottom line, but journalists can't have no integrity. We absolutely can't sell news without evidence to customers. Why do you think this is? Of course, it's not because we're moral. It's because we can't sell it at a higher price. Ji Kwang couldn't help but roll his eyes. So, you've been a supervisor for so long, and you only have this little integrity? However, did an intelligence dealer need the 5 principles and 4 beauties? Selling the news of the death of one's father was the definition of professionalism. So, the reason why this inference was classified as gossip was that it couldn't be sold at a high price, right? Don't you want to try to do some research? Ji Kwang said, I think the relationship between Huaishir and Huaizusuko is a good starting point. We should be able to gain something. No matter how groundless it was, he had to admit that the clue proposed by the detective was an excellent proposition. If properly manipulated, it would be very explosive. It's not necessary. We don't have the conditions for the time being. News about the ivory tower is exclusive to Russell. That old guy treasures his subordinates and students. There's no need to take the risk of angering that guy. The supervisor scratched his head. To be honest, I'm really afraid that the old man will rush in and beat me up. Do you know about the news team from Hell Next Door? Last time, because of the incident in the Village of Dusk, their entertainment reporter planned to do a piece of news about a popular teacher from the Ivory Tower having an affair with an Ivy League student, getting married, and having a child. In the end, they were blocked by an old man who looked after the library. I sat at the door and forcibly isolated him for 2 months. When the heat died down, he couldn't even speak properly when he came out. What a tragedy. Although his words were full of sympathy, he couldn't hide the gloating in his words. Now that we are in the honeymoon period of cooperation, try not to let this kind of thing happen. After all, the company also needs sponsor partnerships. Who wouldn't want to do more sponsor partnerships if they can? The supervisor waved his hand casually, and then this episode came to an end. Next, you can leave the news of Nara to the others. Ji Kwang, I have a new topic for you. You've heard of Kyoto's Yomino Maizaka, right? Are you talking about one of the gathering areas of the Beastmen in the Discovery Realm? More or less. Recently, the situation there has been very chaotic. No, I should say that it's not good. I need someone who is careful enough to take charge of the analysis and avoid missing any clues. Ji Kwang frowned. It doesn't matter to me, but I've been following the news about Nara for so long. Why is there a sudden transfer? Aren't there others? You are the most suitable person. The manager picked up the coffee cup and looked down at the murky liquid at the bottom of the cup. He suddenly asked, I remember that you were the one who organized the whole story of Farbach's mansion, right? Ji Kwang's breathing stopped for a moment. It's just a suspicion. The manager put down the coffee cup and rubbed his eyebrows. There needs to be someone who can do it. So what's your answer? Ji Kwang, other than you, I can't think of anyone else who is more suitable for this position. I will go if I can complete the handover by tomorrow. You are really methodical. No, it's just a work habit. Ji Kwang closed the schedule in front of him and got up to say goodbye. In the quiet office, the manager leaned back in his chair and looked up at the pale ceiling. There was a huge reflection in the pure white. He narrowed his eyes. When Huaishir woke up, it was already afternoon. After breakfast, Miss Motoko rode her bicycle and leisurely returned to the Rikimi family's manor. She didn't hide the chaos in the city last night. Yawning, she went back to her room and fell into a deep sleep. She opened her eyes and looked at the afternoon sun outside the window. She felt sleepy. After a complete rest and relaxation, she felt lazy. Her heart was calm and peaceful. She got up and slowly washed her face, brushed her teeth, and looked left and right at the reflection in the mirror. Well, a man's appearance was more pleasant. In the reflection in the mirror, Huaishir's skin gradually disappeared, followed by the bloody texture below, and finally revealed the complicated reflection of the sacred mark. The veins of the bone burial sanctuary were rooted between his bones and internal organs, penetrating his heart, lungs, stomach, and even nerves and glands. It was like a giant tree growing in his body. Now, in addition to the completely changed right hand, Huaishir's heart had also become like a dim and transparent shadow, silently fluctuating, and a trace of darkness appeared in the scarlet blood in his body. Thanks to the strong stimulation of the large amount of industrial materials, the etherization of Huaishir's internal organs was one step closer. In order to digest the overly large disaster, the body instinctively tried to integrate with the young Master Ming's sacred mark, rapidly increasing the progress of the etherization. Now, it had reached about 40%. Thanks to Tongi's repeated backstabs, Huaishir's heart was the first to complete the etherization and was no longer restricted by his body of flesh and blood. After assimilating with the sacred mark, it had the resilience of a miracle and was no longer a fatal weakness. This was really worth celebrating. In the future, when someone stabbed him in the back, he would be able to take a few more blows, right? Another unexpected change was that Huaishur discovered that the origin substance equipment in his soul was missing. The sacrificial knife was gone. More accurately, it had been swallowed. The vicious blade of hatred had taken its place, and the remaining origin substance within the sacrificial blade had disappeared without a trace. This was something that could be predicted. As the weapon with the lowest degree of completion among all the origin substance equipment, the sacrificial knife was originally used as a carrier for the Een Spirit's sacred mark to implant into Huaishur's soul. It didn't combine with his own origin substance. In addition, it didn't have the miracles and disasters that belong to the American lineage to supplement and strengthen it. As a result, apart from the ability to suck blood, everything else was lacking. Now that it had encountered the imperial divine blade of hatred, which was also in the same domain, it was naturally difficult for it to maintain its integrity and was gradually being replaced by hatred. After fusing with the sacrificial knife, the patterns on the hatred's feathers were now tinged with a hint of gold, making it more luxurious. However, it was even more vicious than before. Apart from devouring the miracles and disasters, it had also gained the ability to suck blood and vitality. Now that it was this strange, it was definitely a demonic blade, wasn't it? For the time being, it had grown. Even the crows were very happy when they went out to eat last night. The current Nara was like a treasure trove. There were bad things to kill, food to eat, experience to gain, and Amber's words were very pleasant. If it weren't for the fact that he had a cross-dress, he would have liked this place. Then, Huaishur stopped brushing his teeth. He saw a white shadow float past him in the mirror. Was it an illusion? He frowned and continued to brush his teeth. Then, he saw another shadow float past the door behind him. He paused, put down his toothbrush and cup, turned around, and walked out of the bathroom. Then, he saw the figure wandering aimlessly in the living room. It was translucent, like an illusion. The barefoot Miss Paper had her hands behind her back and was casually strolling around the living room. She looked around as if she had never seen anything before. She reached out and rubbed the crows that were cawing happily as if she was stroking a cat. She turned around and looked at the TV's brainless variety show. She was confused and laughed along with the audience on the TV. She was like a child. Sensing the gaze behind her, she looked back at Huaishur and smiled. Then, the illusion gradually dissipated and returned to Huaishur's shadow. It's over. Huaishur's mind buzzed. At first, he suspected that he had suffered retribution for cross-dressing too much. He finally had a split personality. But no matter how he looked at that figure, he felt that something was wrong. Inexplicably, he thought of a certain black-hearted bad thing. Even if it was a reflection of young Master Ming, wasn't it too free? It should be a double clone. Even if it had grown, how could it be so lively? What are you doing? Huaishur picked up the phone and asked the black-hearted woman on the other end who was pretending to know nothing. I've only been in Yingzhou for a week, and I found that my shadow suddenly seemed to have become a spirit and started to move on its own. Do you have any clues? How would I know? The innocence in Tong Ji's words was almost overflowing. She looked pitiful as she said, "Don't tell me that I would harm. All right, I admit that I was a little evil in the past, but it's been so long. Am I still that evil woman who likes to harm people in your heart?" "That's right, you are." Huaishur rolled his eyes. "So, what's going on? Why is Miss Paper becoming more and more like you?" "This. You scare me to death. I thought you were going to say something." "It's normal. Sit down, don't panic." Tongi immediately calmed down and seemed to be relieved. It made people more curious about what she was worried about just now. "So, you've harmed me in other ways?" Huaishur widened his eyes in disbelief. "That's called harm. This is sister's love for you." Tongi felt wronged and asked with tears in her eyes, "What do you think the relationship between us is?" "Of course it's the relationship between the victim and the victim." Therefore, the voice on the other end of the phone became more and more helpless. "I know. Huaishur, there are many misunderstandings between us. You have a lot of misunderstandings about sister, but you're my contractor, Huaishur. There's no one in this world who's closer to me than you." Tongi seemed to be wiping her tears and was full of sadness. You have to believe that sister's heart and yours are always connected. Then wouldn't your reflection be equivalent to my reflection? Huaisha felt that something was wrong. As she spoke, she seemed to be very proud and asked, think about it. In order to make you not feel lonely in a foreign land, sister's existence passed through the barrier and turned into a phantom to accompany you by your side. What a touching bond. How is it? Isn't it exciting? Exciting my ass. Huaisha felt that if it weren't for his high degree of ether conversion, he would have had a cerebral hemorrhage by now. He was tricked by her again. So, she was also in this side account. Chapter 642. As for whether it was exciting or not. To be honest, it was indeed exciting. Huaisha panicked at the thought of a little ghost-like, translucent shadow running around his bedroom when he fell asleep in the middle of the night. It was like running to the wrong place. He had always felt that this world was very fantastical, but he didn't expect that it had already developed into a suspense and horror genre. How could someone insert a surveillance camera in his heart when he was already in Ingzhou? 24 hours of in-depth monitoring. Huaisha felt his heart twitch at the thought of a black-hearted bad thing staring at his back and wallet at all times. He couldn't help but tremble with anger. When would the tool stand up? Huaisha habitually finished a set of martial arts and was about to add a few more words when he heard a knock on the door. He hung up the phone in Tongi's unreliable blessing. 10 seconds later, Miss Huai, she opened the door with a melancholy expression and stared at the servant in front of her. The servant who came to the door felt a chill in his heart when he saw her gaze. He didn't know whether it was good or bad news. Huaiji Motoko's second chef demon duel began. In these 2 days, the first round of the chef demon duel was not even halfway done, but the second round came so suddenly. The host of a Rigian family didn't hide the reason and told Junshi and Huaiji Motoko bluntly. Someone had issued a challenge to them. They could accept it, and the loser would naturally leave. If they didn't accept it, nothing would happen. As for the party who proposed the challenge, if they lost, they would have to pay not only their candidate spot, but also a valuable bet. Although Huaisha didn't care about this money, he still chose to accept it after looking at Junxi's shining eyes. Huaisha could more or less guess the opponent's plan. It was nothing more than sending a pawn to test the waters and see the level of Huaiji Suzi, the skill she was most proficient in, her school, and her weakness. Among all the chef demons, only Huaiji Motoko was the most mysterious. She even shook a glass of ice water from the beginning to the end. In the end, she relied on a glass of cold water to defeat the seated contestant, Shun Jinqing. This scene was too bizarre. Many people felt a chill run down their spines. He wanted to know her true level. Huaisha was very calm about this, because he didn't have any real skills at all. As long as he didn't encounter the most troublesome cooking demon in his perception, he could fight as he pleased. This kind of person who was sent to test Huai Qi could only be used as cannon fodder in Vanguard. Huaisha didn't even need to do anything. She could exhaust the other party to death by eating. At the same time, he could gain some experience points. And there was money to be made. In fact, was there anything better than this? Unless the other party doubled the amount, Huaisha felt that there was nothing left. It was a pity that he hadn't realized this earlier. Otherwise, he could have eaten a few more meals from Shun Jinqing. With a calm heart, Huaisha quietly spent the short time before the match. To be on the safe side, after making some preparations, he walked into the huge underground square with Shin under the lead of the servant. The atmosphere was still strange. The previous cooking demon duel seemed to have just ended. The rich and suffocating aroma of meat enveloped the entire square. Just smelling it made people dizzy. Miss Huaisha, you're late. You missed the most exciting part. The cooking demon Vladimir, whose body was covered in tattoos and was as tall and sturdy as a bear, greeted her warmly, as if they were really familiar with each other. Huaisha immediately looked at the square eagerly. Did anyone make a few more servings this time? He could bring them back to appraise later. Unfortunately, no. After all, there were very few cooking demons who were as magnanimous and young as Zhu Zijian. Now, every one of them in the square hid themselves well. Unless it was necessary, they wouldn't reveal anything. And when they learned that Huaishir Suko was about to enter the next cooking demon duel, everyone's eyes instantly became fervent. They hoped that she would reveal her true strength. They didn't expect that apart from being able to eat, she was also weak, helpless, and pitiful. In the midst of the aroma of meat, the hippie Aram put away his tools and looked back at Huaishir, who was waiting to go on stage. He seemed to be stunned and quickly gave up his position. His opponent, on the other hand, was carried out. His body was purple, his lips were black, and his limbs were swollen. It didn't look like he was poisoned. The moment he brushed past the stretcher, Huaishir raised his eyebrows slightly. This was rhabdomyolysis? It seemed to be the aftereffects of explosive exercise and fitness. Because of the large amount of muscle rupture, it led to self-poisoning, as well as acute kidney failure and other symptoms. He was all too familiar with this. The foundation classes of the Orchard Gym were taught as a warning when Elder Luo was teaching the foundation of fitness. It was too rare to see a sublimator become like this. But what exactly did he eat to make himself like this? And it acted up so quickly, Huaishir smelled the meat aroma that was quickly dispersing in the air and became curious. The central air conditioner was powerful enough. Not long after, the overly rich and uncomfortable meat aroma finally dissipated. "Miss Huaishir, right?" From the entrance, a fat man walked out. His appearance was very proper. His 2 tufts of mustache were carefully groomed. He wore a white chef suit and a rather traditional tall hat on his head. It seemed like he hadn't had a good rest for a long time. His eyes were dark and swollen. When he looked at Huaishir's face, he couldn't help but chuckle. As if he was concerned, he asked, "I heard it was very lively last night. Did you have a good rest? Can you continue the duel? Before you care about others, shouldn't you first solve your kidney problem?" Huaishir calmly asked back. He pulled out a chair and sat behind the kitchen counter. "I'm curious. Who instigated you to start this duel? Did you realize that you were too brave? Miss Huaishir, you are the peak, mysterious, and terrifying. But there has to be an explorer to take the initiative to challenge, right?" The fat man with a Roman accent grinned. "I forgot to introduce myself. Just call me Enrico. Enrico Saragate. Although I'm just a nameless soldier, we are now standing on the same battlefield. Please don't take pity on me. Use your full strength and mercilessly defeat me." Even with such a humble tone, he couldn't hide the malice behind his words. When he narrowed his small eyes and looked at Huaishir, he didn't hide his obscenity. He was salivating. In the stands, Aram was stunned for a moment. He raised his eyes and looked at the fat man. "Enrico? How did this guy get so fat?" The hippie chef pinched his chin and sighed. "This is interesting. Maybe that guy is Miss Huaishir's most troublesome enemy." "You said he's that stinky glue from the Sicilian region?" Vladimir frowned. "How did that guy appear here?" Enrico Saragate. Even among the chef, he was in existence with a bad reputation. In addition to his unpleasant cooking skills, he was also extremely tenacious and could be called a pestering style. It was said that as long as one was targeted by him, it would be like a stinky glue stuck to one's hand. It couldn't be pulled apart, cut off, or removed. It was like a maggot in one's bones. Relying on his extraordinary recovery ability and the help of a large number of forbidden drugs, he obtained an earthworm-like vitality and strong abyssal resistance. Thus, he began his annoying career as a chef. According to records, he once challenged the same opponent more than 40 times in a year. He would continue to pester until he won. And once he won, all of his reputation, achievements, and efforts would be trampled under that guy's feet. In order to make his opponent as depressed as possible, he didn't hesitate to use public opinion, blackmail, intimidation, kidnapping, poisoning his opponent's restaurant, and other tricks. He even changed his appearance to steal his opponent's skills. His reputation became worse and worse, but this growing hatred and resentment also made him stronger and stronger. Like a ghoul, he devoured the corpses of his opponents and grew to his current level. He was indeed standing in the same place as Huaishir Suko. Not only were they on the same battlefield, but they also had the same advantages. That abnormal vitality was like that of a bug. It had a strong resistance to poison and was good at cutting off its tail to survive. In order to participate in this duel, it seems that guy made a lot of preparations. He quickly gained more than 90 kilograms. Aram intentionally or unintentionally raised his voice. According to his unique detoxification method, with so much fat, it seems that it's enough to eliminate the poison that can kill at least a few thousand people. How amazing. He didn't care if his voice was heard by others. Even, Aram intentionally leaked the information to Huaishur. Any chef present only had a strong sense of disgust for a guy like Enrico. It was as if they saw a fly flying around in their own kitchen. They wanted to slap him to death. Even if they were eager to know Huaishur Suko's true level, they still didn't want to stand on that guy's side. Yes, that's right. That's it. Enrico wasn't angry at all as he laughed out loud. His fat jiggled as he said, "Poison and whatnot are of no use to me. Even if you insist on fighting me, I will still stand here for 3 rounds. Miss Huaishur Suko, don't have a naive idea of a quick battle." Huaishur couldn't help but sigh. "It seems that you're not an ordinary loathsome person. Isn't this your love for me?" Enrico placed the huge toolbox beside him. He still had that unpleasant smile on his face as he looked at his opponent. His eyes were watery as he said, "Can we start now? Miss Suko, I can't wait to have intimate contact with you." Hee. "That's right, you know you're my type. It's a pity." He glanced at Huaishur Suko's chest. "It's a pity." Huaishur sighed and looked up at the high platform. "I say, is there a rule against sexual harassment in a chef's duel?" The high platform was silent. There was no response. Obviously, there was no such rule. Chapter 643. The chefs in the stands looked at him sympathetically. This bastard was too familiar with this method. He was very proficient in the method of repeatedly jumping on the edge of a foul. He had used this method to mess with the mentality of many opponents. He even had a despicable record of showing the photos of his opponent's partner during a duel. In order to win, this kind of person would do anything. Unfortunately, this method might work on other female contestants, but what did this have to do with little Peppa of Huai? How could a cup be so inconvenient? Look at your weak tone. You must be a virgin, right? Huaiji Suko glanced at him and sighed in disdain. You have to know shame, you know? You have to know shame. Other than breastfeeding, have you really had physical contact with other women? If I were you, I would cherish every moment of this competition. After all, this is the only place where you can talk to other women. Enrico's expression did not change. It was as if no one was shaken. He just smiled. "Ah, someone once said something similar to you. The end result is really interesting. I'm starting to look forward to it." The kind of sticky laughter made people feel very uncomfortable. He reached out and twisted the gas valve under the huge pot. He ignited the flame. The flame illuminated his strange smile. "I have a feeling that we will get along very happily, very happily." "You're not going to talk anymore?" Huaishur asked curiously. "I want to talk to you about the history of love. By the way, are you married? Do you have a girlfriend? It doesn't matter if you have a boyfriend. I don't discriminate against people like you. We can talk about the history of love. Really, don't be sad. Maybe I'm not as good as you. You see, I don't have a girlfriend until now. But from primary school to university, there are people who confess to me. To be honest, although they are very beautiful, I don't think it's suitable." Enrico's movements did not stop. Only the expression behind the pot stiffened for a moment. Then, it returned to normal. But the box of calamity had been opened. He could not close it whenever he wanted to. "Hey, by the way, have you seen my employer?" Huaiji Suko leaned on her cooking table. She turned around and pointed at the dazed Junshi. "Isn't she super cute? When she's in a daze, she's like a hamster, making me want to poke her face. Are you jealous? This is my employer, mine. It has nothing to do with you at all. Are you envious and jealous now? How is your employer? Was she beautiful? Could it be a man? 30 years old? 40 years old? You have a strong taste. Speaking of which, Ingzhou should be a good place for you. The social animals here are generally more perverted. You should be able to find a lot of them, right? Mr. Enrico? Mr. Enrico, why aren't you saying anything? I still have a secret to tell you. Later, should we find a place to compare our strengths?" As she spoke, the woman pulled up her hair and revealed a beautiful and charming smile. Then, she said in a low and hoarse male voice, "Actually, I'm a transsexual." A sharp clanging sound was heard. Enrico's movements became sluggish, and the toolbox in his hand almost fell onto the table. He raised his head and looked at Huaishur, dumbfounded. His expression twitched. It was indescribable. Not only him, at this moment, in the stands, in the audience, the referee, Chef Demon, and even Zhen Shi widened their eyes in disbelief. Especially Zhen Shi, who almost jumped out of her chair and screamed in surprise. "It's just a joke. Don't be so agitated. It's normal. Sit down, sit down." Huaiji Suko grinned and laughed happily. She returned to her female voice. She looked at Enrico in a teasing manner and asked, "However, I have more shocking news to tell you. Do you want to hear it?" "I don't King want to hear it at all." Enrico's face turned green and then purple. Then, the vigilance in his heart rose rapidly. This woman was a strong enemy. It was the first time he met someone who could turn his mentality around, and she almost succeeded. And it seemed that she was going to increase the intensity. In front of him, Huaiji Suko leaned against the railing and greeted the other female audience in the audience. With a brilliant smile on his face, he made the few big sisters who were watching the battle burst into laughter with just a few words. They were all women, and they were even beautiful enough to make people jealous and hostile. However, she had an incredible charm. With just a few words, everyone had become one. They even agreed to go to the amusement park on weekends. When the Chinese girls who came to watch the match handed over their business cards, they boldly said that they didn't mind Huaiji Suko being a woman. They winked at her ambiguously. The laughter was like a knife cutting into Enrico's heart, causing him to feel as if his heart was about to split open. However, after chatting, Huaiji Suko turned around and looked at him with a sincere face, as if asking him, "How was it? I've demonstrated such a simple operation. Did you learn it?" His face twitched. He looked away and didn't say anything. Huaishur's smile became more and more mocking. "Are you stupid? Stupid brother? Of all things, you want to compete with me on this? Do you really think that my holy disciple level in the black zone of Silent Crown is a vegetarian?" In Enrico's pot, the water had begun to boil. It had to be said that although it was despicable, this guy still put a lot of effort into his basic skills. He was straightforward and quickly finished making a large handful of colorful pasta. When it fell into the pasta in the boiling water quickly rolled and wriggled. It was like a snake. It was full of the texture of a living thing. The hidden malice and disaster seeped out bit by bit, making Huaishur's appetite and began to look forward to it. Until now, he hadn't started the fire. He had made up his mind to eat a few more meals for free. But then, he suddenly had an uneasy premonition, because just after the pasta was put into the pot, Enrico's smile became more and more strange. He raised his hands and took out a cheese brick that was as big as a traditional dongxia drum from the huge toolbox. There was a faint, strange smell in the air, making Huaishur feel that something was wrong. That huge cheese brick, which was even bigger than a wok, seemed to have the aura of life, as if there was something living inside. Furthermore, what greeted him was an indescribable stench. "Hee, this is my secret treasure." Enrico laughed. "Miss Huaishur, this is the Sardinian's special cheese pasta," along with the chopping of the kitchen knife. The outer shell of the cheese brick was smashed. What crawled out from it were fat worms that were as thick as a little finger and made one's scalp numb. Maggots. They were all disgusting maggots. Sardinians live maggot cheese? It's rare to see something that has been preserved for so long. Vladimir sighed in realization. He deliberately raised his voice slightly and reminded her, "So you're going to make this dish of pasta? But this dish that can activate and deform people's internal organs must have been stolen from someone else." Magical cooking from the Roman region was definitely the dark side of cuisine. It gave the pasta an unparalleled vitality, and the person who ate it would welcome the deformity and solidification of their internal organs in this stinky and delicious taste. It could be said to be incomparably terrifying. but it had no lethality to Huaishur. Why would young Master Ming care about this? But now, Miss Huaishur Susie's face was starting to turn green. Disgusting. This was really King enough. He didn't come here to eat live maggots. It was as if he could see a huge scarlet word, danger, flashing above his head. How could he withstand this? Perhaps the cooking demons didn't care about the ingredients, but except for some fierce men who had gone into the wilderness to survive, how could normal people eat it? If Huaishur had a lower limit for food, he wouldn't have to study abyssal botany every day to see what could be eaten. Not to mention this, he couldn't even withstand snail powder and earfold root. Now, Huaishur finally experienced the literal meaning of fear. He was trembling. Even Enrico didn't expect that the appetizer he prepared would be so lethal. Huaishur Susie's face twitched, full of resistance. Huaishur really didn't dare to eat this thing. But this was a battle between cooking demons. If he didn't eat it, it was equivalent to admitting defeat. Now, there was only one way left. Huaishur made the only right decision. That was before the cooking demon's dish was done. He had to cook his own dish first. According to the rules, the cooking demon who delivered the dish first could let the opponent eat his dish first. In other words, as long as he defeated this guy first, he wouldn't have to fight with live maggots later. Fortunately, he had made some preparations before coming here. He specially went to the Dragon Mountain restaurant to have a private kitchen. He quickly took out his phone from his pocket. He opened the menu that was still fresh and hot. The secret manual from the Heavenly Dog Mountain quickly flipped down and then stopped abruptly. This is it. With a terrifying speed, Huaishur opened the fire and set up the wok. Then, he reached out and pressed the lid of the wok. The forging began. The light of the alchemy fire instantly spread out, permeating the inside and enveloping the cold water, causing the water to boil 1,000 times faster than normal. In a short 10 seconds, the water had completely boiled. Then, under the watchful eyes of everyone, Huaishur took out a handful of noodles from his bag. That's right, noodles. It was very common in small stores in Dongxia. You could buy a lot of noodles for 10 yuan, and it didn't even have a production date or preservation date. It was a standard 3 unbranded product. At the same time, it was also a standard unpalatable and couldn't be cooked. For a cooking demon, it could be said to be a useless material that was almost equal to trash. But now, in front of everyone, Huaishur threw the useless noodles into the wok and stirred them quickly with his chopsticks. With the help of the alchemy fire and the forging furnace, the noodles quickly softened and dissipated, churning in the water. In less than 10 seconds, it was completely boiled. The chopsticks quickly picked up a handful of noodles, soaked them in ice and cold water, and dried them. Then, they were casually placed on a bamboo plate, looking quite neat. The blade of resentment popped out. Huaishur moved the knife like the wind, instantly slicing shredded onions, ginger, and wasabi. Then, he picked up the bottle on the condiment plate next to him and poured the soy sauce on the plate. Finally, he sprinkled in the seasoning, stirred it evenly, and squeezed a ball of mustard on the side. The dipping sauce was done. Huaishur, who had some free time, used the knife to carve a messy old house with a radish and piled it in the middle of the noodles. Great job done. At this time, Enrico's pasta hadn't even come out of the wok, nor did he have time to stir it in the living maggot cheese brick, and Huaishur had already pressed the food bell. That's it. Inside and outside the kitchen, everyone stared at the dish in Huaishur's hands in astonishment, unable to believe it. What's this? Water-boiled cold noodles? Huaishur tilted his head and lit the cigarette at the corner of his mouth. After taking a deep breath to calm himself down, he casually flicked the cigarette ash and raised his chin at Enrico. Special Ingzhou cold air buckwheat noodles, please. Chapter 644. Special Ingzhou cold wind buckwheat noodles. A stack of cold noodles and a bowl of dipping sauce were placed in front of Enrico. In the long silence, Enrico's expression twitched. He lowered his head and looked at the plate in front of him. He raised his head and looked at Huaishur, then lowered his head and looked at the plate in front of him. What is this? Special Ingzhou cold wind buckwheat noodles. It doesn't matter if it's cold wind or water, But where is the buckwheat noodles? Even a shameless person like Enrico began to get angry in front of such watered dishes. Where is the buckwheat? I forgot to put it. Huaisha was as calm as ever. Then why is it called cold buckwheat noodles? I said it's specially made. You're so annoying. Huaizasuko raised her hand and flicked the ash of the cigarette. She said impatiently, if you want to, you can call it boiled cabbage. The name is just a name. The content is the essence. You don't want it even though it's free. Do you want me to charge you? Listen to me. People need to earn a living to survive. Only the dishes that cost money will be carefully made by the chef. Free goods like this are just garbage to attract customers to the restaurant, turn consumers into commodities, and then sell membership cards and beverage services at high prices. Garbage, do you know? Just like your maggots. Give me a good taste of the essence of free food. Miss Huaizasuko pinched the cigarette and pressed her hands on the table. She looked down at him and ordered roughly, eat it now, immediately. Being looked at by that pair of fierce eyes, he could almost understand her anger. At the same time, he also felt the horror of the abyss. Even Enrico couldn't help but be stunned for a moment and felt a piercing chill. At the same time, he suddenly realized something. He must eat this bowl of food. No matter what it was, he must eat it. Otherwise, he might really be killed by this woman. He nodded stiffly with difficulty. Then the killing intent disappeared without a trace. It was replaced by a flower-like smile, full of gratification and satisfaction. That's right. A pair of chopsticks was handed to him. She even broke them open for him and stuffed them into his hands, telling him, "Try it, Enrico. This is your fate." She couldn't help but sit at the front of the table. He picked up the chopsticks. She lowered her head and looked at the plate of cold noodles in front of her, which was still emitting cold air, as well as the careless sauce. Smelling the bleak and uncharacteristic smell that did not make him feel happy at all, the first thought that came to his mind was not rejection. Instead, it was a sense of helplessness. How shabby. These words involuntarily came out of his mouth. Yeah, it's too shabby. As Huaisha spoke, he picked up the soup and stirred the pasta in the pot for him to prevent it from sticking to the pot. His actions were clean and neat, without any concealment. With a magnanimous attitude that everyone could see, he helped Enrico resolve his worries. He didn't use any dirty tricks at all. Even Enrico couldn't help but say thank you when he saw the solemn and serious back view. No need. With his back to him, Huaisha responded calmly. It's shameful to waste food. Enrico, whether it's throwing away food or trampling it into garbage maliciously, it's unforgivable behavior. When you waste food, there are people who have to rely on boiled noodles for 3 meals a day. It's normal to be shabby, or rather, it's natural to be shabby. Because we need to save money, because we need to put money on things that are more worth buying, and to live better in the future, we can only be shabby now. Even if we live in humiliation, wandering like a wild dog, and being looked down upon by everyone, it doesn't matter. We live to get better things, not to mix good things with rotten cheese. Huaijisu knocked the soup and put it on the chopping board, looking back at Enrico. Enrico had picked up the first strand of noodles, dipped it in water, and put it into his mouth. It could be expected that there was no taste at all. The noodles had been cooked to a pulp. It wasn't that it was overcooked, but that this kind of cheap noodles was only at this level. When it was put in the mouth, it spread into a sticky mass, tasted like chewing wax, and was difficult to swallow. Enrico had never dreamed that he would eat such a thing one day. No matter how he chewed, he couldn't taste anything else. He could imagine that he was eating beef flavor, mutton flavor, and there were fish balls under his chopsticks. But imagination didn't exist after all. He was just sitting here and eating noodles. Therefore, a burst of panic and sadness spontaneously emerged from his heart. Then he felt the sour taste in the water. There was too much vinegar, and it wasn't tempered at all. It was too sour, and the backlash made the high-quality edible vinegar like cheap sour water. The tip of his nose twitched. The noodles became difficult to swallow. Then he felt bitterness, a thick bitterness that couldn't be ignored. The salt and the seasoning that was roughly put in spread, whipping the tip of the tongue. The rough salt on the ginger and seaweed melted in the mouth, turning into a lingering bitterness. It almost seeped into the soul. It made the taste of the noodles even more uncomfortable, making him nauseous. He couldn't eat it at all, but he couldn't spit it out. It was as if there was an invisible force forcing him to eat it. He had to eat it, no matter how bad it tasted. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to live. Otherwise, he would starve to death. The sourness and bitterness quickly spread. As the noodles were swallowed into his throat, there was a faint tingling pain, making him take a deep breath. It was mustard. The mustard choked him. His eyes were red. He inhaled crazily, turned his head, and sneezed loudly, almost shedding tears. How many years had it been since he was in such a sorry state? This familiar bitterness and sourness, as well as the pain in his heart. Every bite was like eating soil and stones. His body was resisting, and his throat was resisting. But he still had to eat it. He had to eat it. Otherwise, everything would be over. In a trance, a mocking voice sounded again. "What's wrong, Enrico? You boasted shamelessly before. Is this all you've got?" The old man mocked coldly and impatiently chased him away. "If you can't hold on, please leave my kitchen. Don't die in my sacred kitchen. I don't need such trash here." No, please don't stop." Enrico gritted his teeth and held back his tears. He got up from the ground and raised his head with difficulty. He looked at the old man's blurry figure. "I can continue to eat. I can continue." Then he would continue. He would continue to swallow bitter medicine and hellish dishes until he was beyond redemption. It contained humiliation and pain. But could hard work and force get results? Could he usher in a glorious future? Or could he change the shameful past? Those disdainful gazes and the coldness from the people closest to him, in the dry and cold taste, he lowered his head and ate the cold noodles on the plate one mouthful after another. He recalled the scars left by the person closest to him. Trash! How could I have such a shameful son like you? How could you make a simple appetizer like this? What on earth are you thinking in your head? Get out of my kitchen. Then get out. Go as far as you can. He worked hard to learn. He didn't know how many days and nights of suffering and hard work, but he couldn't get recognition. He couldn't see hope. Instead, he was pushed into the abyss of despair again and again. "Father, what do I have to do to satisfy you? Defeat you? I've already done it. I've already defeated countless people. I've relied on the only effort I can do. But why won't you look at me? Can't you even look at me?" As he swallowed with difficulty, the coldness gradually spread and swallowed his body. It occupied his consciousness and even froze his soul. It was as if it wanted to take away all the heat. This was the specially made cold noodles that were guided by the suffering and pain of the past for a long time. Moving forward without hope, running numbly and hesitating in fear. Those things spread as he chewed and entangled in Enrico's lungs. This was not poison, nor was it a curse. It was just the despair that he had personally experienced before. It was the despair that belonged to the 17-year-old Huaisher. There was no end in sight, no end in sight, no way out, and no salvation from the heavens. Enrico had already lost himself in this bitter coldness, unable to extricate himself. He couldn't help but tremble as he panted violently. The breath he exhaled turned into white mist that lost its temperature. Those mocking voices, disgusted eyes, and hostile expressions surrounded him like rice straws accumulated on a camel's back. The more he recalled, the more he could feel the pain and despair that went deep into his bones. Now that he looked back on his 40 years of long life, what remained were not beautiful moments, but countless scars and endless ugly struggles. In order to live, in order to grow, in order to become stronger, he kept giving up. He gave up everything. But even if he became the cooking demon, even if he won, his heart, which had long been cold, could not obtain any satisfaction. No matter how exquisite the miracles and disasters were, he could not obtain even a trace of warmth from it. He could not obtain any happiness. At that moment, he woke up from his sorrow. He lowered his head and stared at his reflection in the water, his purple face, and suddenly murmured, "Look, happiness belongs to others, but I have nothing, yes." Huaisher nodded. Why is it like this? Enrico raised his head blankly and looked at his opponent in front of him. Why do I have to be in so much pain? I don't know either. Huaisher looked at him with pity, as if he was looking at the youth in the past. He thought for a while and said seriously, "It's probably fate." Crack! The sound of something breaking rang out. From Enrico's hand, the chopsticks were broken into several pieces. Such a huge force made people feel as if he was going to break his own fingers. From the bone-piercing coldness, an indescribable anger burst forth. Because he saw Huaisher's eyes, because he sensed the pity in the stance. So he felt more and more pain. He was unable to restrain his anger. "Why are you looking at me with such pitiful eyes?" His face was red, and he violently overturned the table in front of him. He roared at Huaisher and the people on the stage. "I just want to be like you. Is that wrong?" "No one said you were wrong, Enrico." Huaisher calmly flicked the ash of his cigarette and told him, "It's just a little bit of hardship. It's not something that can't be overcome. People should always dream. But I dream about it even in my dreams." Enrico roared with grief and indignation. "I want to be a genius like you, to be as strong as you. Is it useful to think about it? But I can't do it. No matter how hard I try, I can't do it. I just want to stand at the top with you. Why are you looking at me like I'm trash? Is it because my heart isn't sincere enough? Or do I have to be a joke? Do you want to see me make a fool of myself so much? Well, do you want me to kneel?" With indescribable hatred, resentment, and despair, the man roared uncontrollably. His saliva was almost spurting out of his mouth. He shouted with all his strength, but he could no longer hold back his tears. "I can do it. No matter how humble the request is, I can do it. Please look at me, I beg you." He forgot where he was, and even forgot that he was facing his enemy. He lay on the ground in a sorry state and begged in a sorry state. "Please, teach me. How can I be like you?" He shed tears, choked, lowered his head, and let his tears and snot fall into the dust. Like a wandering wild dog, he begged for charity and mercy. He longed for the person in front of him to answer his doubts. "Please teach me, Miss Huaisher. Please save me." Unfortunately, in a long silence, only the woman's voice of pity could be heard. "I'm sorry, no one can teach you, Mr. Enrico. Such a cold judgment." Huaisher, Susie said softly, "No one can save you except yourself." She raised her hand, grabbed the soup, and scooped up the boiling hollow noodles in the pot. She put them in a bowl, drained the water, and then skillfully stirred the sauce. Finally, she took out a piece of cheese from her kitchen counter, melted it, stirred the sauce, and poured it evenly into the bowl. Taking a deep breath, he smelled the rich milk fragrance and the fresh, sour taste of tomatoes. It made his appetite soar. "Don't be sad. Eat a bowl of noodles first." I rearranged the table and placed a brand new bowl of cheese pasta in front of Enrico. "This is not a cooking magic dish. It's a technique I learned from my elders. It might not taste good, but when you're sad, it's always right to eat something high in calories." She picked up the fork, handed it over, and smiled brightly. "After all, even if you want to lose weight, you have to eat until you're full first, right? Eat until you are full. Eat this kind of casually prepared food." In the silence, the dumbfounded Enrico picked up the fork, lowered his head, and glanced at the pasta in front of him. He felt a warmth and sweetness that he had never felt before. Boring. Was there any value in this kind of meaningless dish? Even though he thought so, his body could not help but fork a piece of pasta. He put it in his mouth. The sticky cheese flowed on the tip of his tongue, bringing with it a rich, milky fragrance. The sweetness and sourness of the ketchup spread out bit by bit. Together with the noodles, it turned into a gentle heat that spread in his heart. He could not help but take a deep breath, forgetting his sorry state and abject state. He forked another piece and chewed, forgetting the pain and sourness, immersing himself in this beautiful and rich fragrance. The coldness was dispelled, and even the pain in his heart seemed to have been redeemed and calmed down. Just like that, he became faster and faster. In the end, he lowered his head and held the big bowl in his hand. He wished he could bury it in the bowl. Unbridled Tao Tai. Accompanied by this rare warmth, he swallowed all the pain and coldness into his stomach. He could not stop at all. In the end, the pot of pasta was finished by the two of them. Enrico picked up the spoon out of habit, but when he saw the empty bottom of the pot, he was stunned on the spot. After a long time, his shoulders trembled, as if he was laughing. He was laughing at himself. He put down the clean tableware in his hand. He lowered his head and thanked the woman in front of him with a smile. "Do you feel better?" Fleischer asked. Enrico nodded silently. "So, do you have any ideas?" "No, I can't think of anything because this is my limit." After a long silence, he suddenly raised his head and said, "And I don't plan to continue to be the cooking demon." His earth-shattering speech broke the silence in the stadium, and everyone in the audience was stunned with their mouths wide open in disbelief. When this sentence came out, it was as if he had been released. He bid farewell to the sea of bitterness that had troubled him for a lifetime. Enrico smiled, calm and gentle, and there was no longer any pain and hesitation. "Have you really decided?" Fleischer asked curiously. Enrico nodded. "That's right." He nodded in agreement and could not help but pat his shoulder. There are many choices in life. If it's painful, it doesn't matter if you don't want to be the cooking demon. However, in the future, you have to work harder. I suggest you start by finding a girlfriend. Please let me off the hook this time. Enrico smiled helplessly, but no matter what, he could not hold back the urge to cry. It was not because of pain and despair, but because in this sudden silence, he could not hold back the surging gratitude in his heart. Then, "Thank you for your hospitality." Huaiji Suzi slowly stood up and smiled happily at him. After waving goodbye, she hummed a song and turned to leave. Just like that, in the dead silence, the second round of the cooking demon duel ended. The final result was without a doubt. Huaiji Suzi won. At this moment, in the stadium, when everyone stared at that unbelievably beautiful face, they felt a chill and horror from the bottom of their hearts. In a short 20 minutes, 2 dishes, one of which could not even be considered a cooking demon dish, just like that, she easily made a battle-hardened cooking demon give up all his pursuits in the first half of his life and willingly drown in the warmth she created. They could not understand and could not believe it. However, the truth was right in front of everyone's eyes, along with a huge fear and shadow. The entire stadium seemed to be shrouded by that petite and slender figure, making it difficult for them to breathe. This is a genuine extraterrestrial devil. In a long silence, only Guashuk's unreserved praise and appreciation, accompanied by a strange and sharp laughter, echoed in everyone's hearts. That's right, other than a demon, what else could toy with a person's will to such an extent? At that moment, everyone no longer had any doubts about the information sent by the Tomorrow News. The Headless Witch Huaiji Suzi. That was half an hour ago. Just as the match started, Makoto heard a voice from beside her. It sounded familiar. The tone was calm and polite, without any offense of an uninvited guest. She only asked, "Can I sit here?" When she turned around in surprise, she saw a young man standing in the aisle. To be precise, it was a warrior with a sword. He was the most popular man among the candidates for the head of the family, the adopted son of the previous head of the family, Rimi Joshizuka. At the same time, he was also Makoto's cousin in name. Instinctively, Makoto shrank back a little, and Crow, who stayed beside her, raised his scarlet eyes to look at Joshizuka, ferocious and thirsty. "Don't worry, I won't do anything impolite. After all, you're my blood relative. Didn't you call me brother when you were young?" Rimi Joshizuka smiled faintly and pointed to the chair beside him. "Can I sit down? I have something to say." After a long silence, Makoto nodded. And so, Joshizuka sat down, sitting upright and still with a meticulous attitude. There was no pressure or coldness, just like a conversation between siblings. He asked calmly, "Makoto, your collaborator, is Hupa, right?" Makoto's body stiffened. She did not know how to respond. Should she agree or refute, or should she just keep silent? This isn't really a secret. After all, your agent, Madame Suzy, has publicly revealed an intimate relationship with Hupa. If you want to guess, it's actually very simple. Jio Shizuka waved his hand and said straightforwardly, "To be honest, this duel was initiated by my suggestion." Makoto was stunned. Her eyes were wide open from the beginning to the end, and she did not relax at all. "Although part of it is selfish, I don't want you to be involved in such a dirty matter, and it would be best if you could leave. But more than that, I just want to create an environment to have a good chat with you." Rimi Jio Shizuka thought for a moment, and after a moment of silence, he said to her, "Although this is very abrupt, I think it is best to be honest with you from the beginning. So I won't hide anything." He said, "Makoto, please break the alliance with Hupa." Chapter 645. Zhanshi was stunned for a long time, staring blankly at Jiu Jing beside him. The young warrior was also looking at him, his expression sincere. After a short period of silence, Zhanshi thought for a moment, then said, "Cousin, I'm just a country girl. I'm not that smart either. I can't be fashionable. That's why my mother always told me that if I don't understand something, I should just ask and answer directly. Even if I offend someone, it's still better than pretending to be powerful and being looked down upon. I actually have a lot of questions that I want to ask, but this is too impolite. You won't mind, right?" Jiu Jing was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Please speak." Zhanshi thought for a long time, then asked directly, "So, cousin, do you want me to betray Miss Hupo and side with you?" "It's fine even if you don't side with me. I just want you to stay away from this quagmire," Jiu Jing replied. "Zhanshi, you don't belong here. It's not that I look down on you, but that you're not suited for such dirty matters." "Cousin, do you know about my situation?" "I've investigated a bit, and I've also heard a bit about it." Jiu Jing pulled out a string of prayer beads from his sleeve and handed it over. "That's why I brought this for you." The aged coral prayer beads glowed faintly, and there was also a faint fluctuation of origin substance. This was a treasure from the Tiantai sect, and it was something that monks used to get close to Buddhism and awaken a spirit. After hundreds of years of support, it wasn't inferior to any other Saraira. It was a treasure that would be treasured in any temple. It was easy to use, and there were no restrictions. All one had to do was carry it with them and meditate, and keep their mouth shut. Within 3 years, if they chanted 100,000 times, they would be able to condense a spirit. Every time they chanted, they would inject their own origin substance into it bit by bit. As long as they were focused enough and worked hard enough, they would be able to raise their origin substance to a higher level in 3 years. Unfortunately, not everyone was able to do it. Not just anyone had this kind of determination and perseverance. Even among the most devout and dedicated monks, there were very few who could complete this long and arduous ascetic practice. However, it was still a way to solve the problem. Zhanshi looked at it for a long time, but didn't take it. "Cousin, are you trying to bribe me? This isn't a price. It's just a favor I'm offering as an elder brother." Zhanshi thought for a moment and asked, "Help means that I can refuse, right? Whether you accept it or not, it's up to you. This isn't a recruitment price. You can accept it without worry. Although I really want it, forget it." Shinichi shook her head. "I'm sorry." Jiu Jing nodded. "I know it's rude to suddenly come here and say these things, so it's fine. No, it's not that I have a problem with you. It's my own problem." She smiled awkwardly and looked at her relatives who were looking at them. "Cousin Jing Jiang, it's already hard for a girl from the countryside to stand up straight and talk to people from the city. After lowering my head once, I'm afraid that I won't have the courage to raise my head again." Jiu Jing was stunned. After a long silence, he lowered his head and apologized. "I was rude." "It's okay. Cousin, you have good intentions," Shinichi said seriously. "So, I have to be honest with you. Thank you for your help, but I'm sorry, I won't give up." "You're so straightforward, Shinichi." Jiu Jing sighed. "You didn't even give me a chance to say anything. Should I call you stupid or troublesome? Maybe you're better than I thought." He shook his head in self-mockery. "Failure is expected. However, although what I'm going to say next may be seen as a scoundrel trying to drive a wedge between us, I still have to tell you." After a short pause, Jiujing said, "Please be careful of Hoopa." "Cousin, are you saying that Hoopa is using me?" Shinichi asked doubtfully. "I know that for now. If she's just using you, then I'm using you too." Jiujing shook his head. "I just want to tell you that that woman doesn't have the warmth and compassion you think she has. She's also not someone you could trust. Shinichi, before you, out of all the candidates for the head of the house, the only one I care about is her. To be exact, I'm afraid of that woman's existence. Right now, the Riken family is in decline, but if that woman becomes the next head of the house, I'm afraid that the Riken family will cease to exist in the future. I've known since 8 years ago that she's a cold-blooded monster without any emotions. That's a bit too much." Shinichi frowned. "Is Hoopa cousin such a scary person? Do you know who was the head of the Riken family before my adoptive father?" Jiujing asked. "It was Hoopa's biological father." The girl was stunned. "That's right. Hoopa is the legitimate princess of the Riken family. At the same time, she's also the one who has the right to inherit the house. 8 years ago, everyone who saw her had to lower their heads. Some even knelt by her side and respectfully called her GMO. No, now that I think about it, she was already abnormal even earlier." Riken Jiujing lowered her eyes and said softly, "She was different from us since she was very young. She was always quiet and gentle. She would never get angry or laugh. She was just like a doll. Jiujing used to be like the group of children. They all followed behind a noble princess and longed to be her friend, even if she never cared about them. Noble and distant, like an illusion. This beautiful illusion lasted until 8 years ago. The Riken family made a fatal mistake. The general was furious. That ruthless power was exerted on the land of Yingzhou without any restraint. It was like a black cloud pressing down on the sky, causing everyone to be in a constant state of panic. The elders argued all day long, debating who should be responsible for the destruction caused by this carelessness. The head of the house didn't say a word. It was hard for him to make a decision. Deserted by everyone, everyone could only wait for the end of the road with their eyes wide open. "Cut the stomach, father." Jiujing, who was immersed in her memories, whispered. That's what she said at that time. In front of everyone, she said those cold words that they couldn't believe. The 11-year-old Hoopa knelt in front of her closest blood relative in the world. She lowered her head and pleaded from the bottom of her heart. "Please cut the stomach, father." She said, "The Riken family is already at the point of life and death. As the head of the house, there's no other way to wash away the shame." In that frozen silence, no one spoke. Only the head of the house's face gradually turned pale. He looked at his daughter, who was kneeling in front of him, and couldn't say a word. "Please don't be afraid, father." She lowered her head and said softly, "I'll help you end it." This was the last thing Jiujing heard in the corridor. In her daze and fear, she didn't even notice that the tea in her hand had spilled on the ground. Just like what she said, there was no other way. Only this way could the mistake be redeemed. It was said that the girl, who wasn't even of marriageable age, personally carried out the mistake for her father. Holding the knife, without any hesitation, she ended her father's pain and fulfilled the promise between father and daughter. Then, she personally held her father's head and presented it to the general. In the end, the Riken family got a chance to survive. The price he had to pay was an unprecedented humiliation. He became a traitor among the officials, fawning over outsiders and being looked down upon by others. But things ended just like that. The head of the Riken family died of an illness. Then, another head of the house took over and cleaned up the mess. As for Hoopa, she was forgotten by everyone. As the only child of the head of the house, she should have been taken good care of. But that kind of thing, no one can pretend that it didn't happen, right? Every time they see her, everyone will only think of that face stained with her biological father's blood. It's hard to feel at ease. They can only treat her coldly, marginalize her, and let her fend for herself. Actually, when she asked to be exiled, everyone was relieved. Unfortunately, everyone underestimated her. Jiujing sighed softly. She went to Dongxia, but she came back. She pretended that nothing had happened and returned in front of everyone. It's as if she became reasonable. But in reality, who knows what she's thinking? Zhenxi, to her, There are no allies or relatives. If you expect her to help you out of kindness, you're not too naive. You need to think for yourself. Jeanne, she was still stunned. Her eyes widened in disbelief. It seemed that she was still in shock and hadn't reacted yet. Doesn't that mean that cousin Hoopa killed her own father with her own hands? She murmured in a daze. That's too cruel, isn't it? Jiao Jing shook her head. It's normal to feel afraid. No, I mean she had to kill her own father with her own hands. Jeanne, she raised her head and said seriously, I think that cousin must be sadder than anyone else, right? After all, in this world, is there anyone who hates their own father? Jiao Jing was silent. Being stared at by that pair of eyes without any haze, there were many things that he couldn't say. He laughed self-deprecatingly and looked away. There are also incompetent fathers in this world, Jinshi. There are also people who don't deserve to be respected. But I think that no matter what I say, you won't change your mind, right? Jeanne, she nodded. Because we've already made an appointment. She replied, a promise is more important than life. Mother always taught me that. Besides, even if something happens, I think that Miss Hu Chi won't abandon me. When she looked at the back of the figure in the arena, the girl's eyes were filled with peace and trust. It was as if there was nothing to be afraid of as long as she was by his side. Jiao Jing was silent, his expression complicated. Just holding on to a boat that happened to pass by occasionally, she went with the flow and challenged the unknown dark ocean. Was this naive or reckless? He didn't know, and there was no need for him to say anything. Then, as an opponent, let's fight it out, Zhen Shi. After saying goodbye, the young warrior took one last look at his enemy and left. Chapter 646. Are you all right? When Huaishir and Zhen Shi left the arena, he felt Zhen Shi's gaze on him. He looked like he wanted to say something, but hesitated. It was as if he had something to say. My cousin told me something about Miss Hoopa. Zhen Shi thought for a long time and didn't know how to tell him. She just said some bad things. Then what do you think? I don't know how to say it. Zhen Shi sighed in distress. But I feel that everyone's life is so difficult. If people want to live, they can't live a simple life. Huaishir shrugged. It's hard to work, and it's also hard to live a better life. Everyone just wants to work as little as possible so that they can live a better life. Also, my cousin wanted me to withdraw from the selection, but I didn't agree. Actually, it doesn't matter if you agree. Huaishir said, if you don't want to do it, then just leave. Even if you don't rely on the Rigian family, the ivory tower will find a way. Thinking about how he could stab that stupid sister of Hoopa in the back, how should he put it? He was quite excited. Although he probably couldn't do it, most likely, he would be forced to do more troublesome work and become an even more tiring tool. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but sigh. Miss Huaishir about that. Zhen, she said shamefully, actually, there's no need to go through so much trouble because of me. I'm already very grateful that you can help me so much. You think too much. Huaishir looked back at her. Actually, you don't have to blame yourself or feel uneasy. I didn't do this because I wanted to get anything from you. I just happened to meet you and wanted to do it. Just think of it as me wanting to be a hero and satisfy myself. If it were someone else, I would probably do the same. Zhen, she was stunned for a long time and subconsciously wanted to complain. Miss Huaishir, according to the development of the TV series, shouldn't it be for a girl as beautiful as Zhen Shi? I'm willing to do anything. Huaishir was amused. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks and moved closer to her. He reached out and lifted Zhen Shi's chin. Then, he lowered his head and looked down at her rapidly expanding pupils. A devilish smile appeared on his face. He slowly moved closer to her and whispered in her ear, "What are you doing? Do you think you're better looking than me?" Zhen Shi's expression froze, and her rapid breathing froze. To be honest, he didn't. But wasn't this development a bit too outrageous? She looked away angrily and couldn't help but complain in a low voice. Miss Huaiji is so cold. It can't be helped. My former boss taught me that if I'm too nice, my days will be very difficult. Huaishir, who was walking in front, stretched and answered casually. After a long while, He heard Zhen Shi's nervous voice. She seemed to have made up her mind. Miss YG, I've thought about it for a long time. I feel that I should continue. Okay, good luck then. Huaisher nodded and reluctantly encouraged her, but he felt the girl behind him tugging at his sleeve. With a serious and nervous expression, she widened her eyes and asked the most important question. So, when you go to the amusement park, can you take me with you? As if she was afraid that Huaisher would not agree, she quickly added, I'm very capable. I can help everyone carry their bags. Huaisher was stunned for a long time, and his face began to twitch. Not until then did she realize that she had taken what Enrico had said to those young misses of Hua clan seriously. What was even more unbelievable was that she had been going around in circles for half a day just to ask this question. Can I? Zhen, she was uneasy. Okay. Huaisher sighed. How else could he answer? We'll go tomorrow, okay. Instantly, Zhen Shi beamed with joy. She couldn't help but cheer happily, as if she had won a big prize. Huaisher could almost feel that she had an invisible little tail wagging wildly. That was enough. After being happy, she pestered Huaisher to ask what she needed to prepare, whether she needed sunscreen, whether she should make lunch in advance, and how to be friends with the other Chinese ladies without being disliked. If it's too troublesome, then don't take them. Huaisher waved his hand casually. Anyway, they're a group of ladies who have nothing but infatuation in their minds. I feel that it will be troublesome if I get entangled with them. You just dropped it like that? Zhen, she was stunned. You just dropped the promise with the girls so casually. Miss Huaisher is so heartless. What else? I didn't plan to take them. Huaisher walked in front of her without a care. He didn't take the behavior of the scumbag seriously at all. He came to Yingzhou to open a smuff account, not to pick up girls. Even if he wanted to pick up girls, he didn't need to find a group of Chinese ladies who were more scheming than a sieve, right? Besides, what did Motoko Huaisher's promise have to do with Huaisher? I've ditched her. He did something that would cause him to be kicked by a horse without any psychological burden. Then, he heard Zhen Shi snickering behind him. What's wrong now? No, nothing. Zhen, she pursed her lips and quickened her pace to follow him. Looking at the gradually familiar back, she couldn't help but smile. She felt indescribably relieved. Although she always gave people the impression that she was cold and heartless, she was actually gentle and kind. She was really too cute. The amusement park. It's the Ferris wheel. Miss Huaisher, look, it's the legendary merry-go-round. God, Chi-Chi and Nini. I want to take a picture. I want to take a picture with them. Miss Huaisher, let's go together. It's a rare opportunity. Just like a country girl who came to the city, Zhen Shi was in a state of surprise and excitement the whole time. She dragged Miss Huaisher and ran around like a gust of wind. The group of primary school students who were here to study and travel were all shocked. They didn't understand why that country girl was more excited than them. She was like a child who came to the amusement park for the first time. In fact, this was indeed her first time. Zhen Shi grew up in a place called Daoquan Village. It was just a settlement within the boundaries of a small town. Outside of the old and backward town, there were layers upon layers of cultivated farmland. Apart from a special rice that they produced, there was nothing else to boast about. It was a typical village. Zhen Shi, who grew up there, had never even been to Yongno-Maizaka before. To understand the outside world, she could only watch television. Everything she saw was strange. Huaisher, on the other hand, was uninterested. If it weren't for the fact that he was worried that Zhen Shi wouldn't be able to stand staying in the yard all day, he wouldn't even want to go out. But even if he came to the amusement park, he wouldn't experience the thrill and excitement that was exclusive to ordinary people. Instead, he felt like this was it. The giant drop tower dropped dozens of meters, but for Huaisher's dynamic vision, it was almost like a stop-motion animation. The box of popcorn he brought up was still the same when he brought it down. Not a single one was spilled. The roller coaster moved at high speed, circling up and down. When everyone was screaming, Huaisher only felt that today's wind was very noisy. He also took out his phone from his pocket and took a yawning selfie. He accurately captured Zhen Shi's cheeks, which were distorted due to fear and inertia. How to say it? It was like a hamster with a mouth full of melon seeds. It was quite interesting. Unfortunately, under Zhen Shi's strong objection, he could only delete it, and he was dragged around to take photos. Since you want to take a photo together, you must take a good one. After dragging Huaishe around half of the park with such an excuse, Zhen Shi finally caught the popular character here. Chi-Chi, the staff member, was hidden in a round and delicate bear doll cover, and when he raised his feet and waved his hands, he looked charmingly naive. After hearing Zhen Shi's request to take a photo together, he took the initiative to pose in a classic welcome pose and stood beside the two of them. The staff member on the other side picked up the camera and aimed it at them. When he was about to press the shutter, he heard the voice of Miss Chi-Chi wait. In front of the camera, Huaishe turned around and looked at the Chi-Chi bear behind him, and his eyebrows gradually frowned. Hey, aren't you a bit too out of shape? Chi-Chi's standard pose is a bit more forward, open his hands, and tilt his head at a 30-degree angle. Idiot, you're too much. This is not Chi-Chi, it's a horror film. Raise your head forward and your center of gravity back. It was rare and strict. After correcting the staff member's problem with each movement, he nodded in satisfaction. Okay, now it's done. Zhen Shi held the ice cream that was about to melt and stood there dumbfounded. She didn't know there were so many things to pay attention to. But compared to the previous movements, it was much cuter. As expected of Miss Chi-Chi, she even knew this. How amazing. Moreover, while taking the photo together, Zhen Shi gathered her courage and held Miss Chi-Chi's arm, and she wasn't rejected. With some hidden thoughts, Zhen Shi's mood became more and more cheerful. She was excitedly planning in her heart, I'll work hard to pave the way, and in 2 days, I'll pretend to be casual and change the title from Miss Chi-Chi to Tsukiko. However, 2 days was still too long. Should he shorten a little? But if it's too presumptuous, will it be rude? Also, Miss Chi-Chi doesn't seem to care about this. Should I find a chance to test her? While feeling happy, she subtly fell into distress. She made a strange sound. Smileful. It's so good to go to the amusement park with Miss Chi-Chi, and just now they even held hands and took a photo together. Also, her favorite female bear, Nini, gave her colorful balloons. It was so happy that it felt like a dream. But next to her, Miss Chi-Chi's expression became serious. She looked at Nini carefully and frowned. Hey, you. Nini stood there in shock, and her 2 short little hands touched her head, not knowing what was going on, until Huaishe reached out and pointed at her waist, the shirt exposed through the seam of the doll's suit. The zipper wasn't pulled up properly. Is this your first day at work? It's fine if you don't pose when you give the guests balloons, but can't you put on the leather cover properly before coming out? Huaishe angrily scolded. This is no longer a matter of deducting performance. Don't you even have the basic standards of being a staff member? If you don't have the determination to be a character, then don't do this job. Nini was stunned in place, overwhelmed by the sudden, strange aura. She subconsciously bowed and apologized, then turned around and ran away while covering the seam. Huaishe's expression calmed down a little, and he looked back to the side. Not far away, the pink cat that seemed to be lazing around on the bench shivered. She felt the gaze on her back and quickly danced with all her strength. Huaishe's eyes twitched, and his expression became more and more unpleasant. What's wrong? In the setting of the story, Lulu Cat can't dance. Huaishe took a deep breath, raised his hand, and pressed on Lulu Cat's shoulder. Enough, stop. Haven't you even read the setting of the character? He was angrily scolding. What are you doing? How can you serve the guests with such an attitude? One by one, they were either exposed or in OOC. How did you guys do your basic training? Bring laughter to the guests with your heart. Do you understand laughter? Lulu Cat gradually bent down and shivered on the spot. For some reason, she felt that the beautiful woman in front of her had become some kind of giant monster at the moment, looking down at her condescendingly. She was shrouded in a huge shadow, and it was difficult to resist or argue. After a while, Huaishe's expression became a little better. The other staff members were decent, but a few of them were extremely unbearable to look at. Miss Huaishe, when she's serious, always feels so powerful. She next to him sighed. She's as majestic as a great senior in the club. When she reprimands the newcomers, they can't even raise their heads. I just can't stand it. It's too unprofessional. Huaisher shook his head and refuted. He heard a voice not far away. Mom, I want to take a picture with that big sister. The child excitedly pointed at Miss Huaisher and shouted loudly. His mother looked at him and suddenly became embarrassed. Xiao Jian, you can't be so rude. Unexpectedly, the seemingly indifferent young lady turned her head and mysteriously revealed a standard smile. Sure. When Huaisher reacted, he had already reached out and picked up the child. He faced the camera with a smile and made a peace sign. Then, click. Wait a minute, is there something wrong? He finally noticed the strange state of his body. This strange feeling began after entering the amusement park. Just like before, his body moved by itself. He entered a strange role, but from the beginning to the end, he didn't feel anything strange. What the hell? Why did he trigger this damn buff when he entered the amusement park? At this moment, in the eyes of others, Miss Huaisher smiled sweetly under the sun, like a princess coming out of a fairy tale. Her whole body emitted an illusionary light. She was so eye-catching. She was like the protagonist walking into his own film set, extremely dazzling. The other children next to him stared enviously and also raised their hands and shouted, Me too. I also want to take a picture with Big Sister. What the hell? If you're in the amusement park, just find a fairy tale character to play. Why bother a tourist like me? Huaisher originally wanted to say that, but when he looked at the pairs of big eyes full of longing, he felt that his style had changed instantly. Okay. Miss Huaisher smiled gently and opened her arms. Children, don't worry one by one. You have to line up. After dealing with the children with great difficulty, before Huaisher could breathe a sigh of relief, a middle-aged man who was wiping sweat rushed over and bowed to Huaisher on behalf of the staff. I'm really sorry, customer. Those guys just started work yesterday. We will definitely strengthen the staff's basic training and definitely won't let such a situation happen again. With a nervous expression, he apologized and even included express tickets for 2 people and the best seats for the afternoon parade. He said all the good things, as if he was afraid that Huaisher would kill his whole family if he wasn't satisfied. It was very strange. Even after the 2 of them had walked far away, the director was still wiping the sweat on his forehead, the lingering fear still lingering. The accompanying secretary was puzzled. There's no need to be like this, director. It's just a small matter. Fujita-kun, this is not a small matter. The director smiled bitterly and shook his head. Didn't you notice? That kind of gaze, it felt like someone from the main park came to inspect. Moreover, this kind of dignified feeling I only saw from the old director when I was young and studied in Edo Amusement Park. Director, you're exaggerating, right? I hope it's just an illusion. But even behind the leather covers, we're still playing the role of the children's dreams, and we can't afford to make any mistakes. What's going on with Chi-Chi and Nini today? Not to mention outsiders. Even I can't bear to watch it. The staff member on duty is hospitalized because of the flu, and it seems like a newcomer is taking over. Newcomers are still unreliable. Back then, to play the role of Chi-Chi and Nini, it would take at least 4 years of training. The director shook his head and took off his suit. Sure enough, at this time, it's still necessary for a veteran to appear. Hey, Fujita-kun, what are you waiting for? Hurry up and take off your clothes. I'll leave Nini to you. No, wait, director, don't pull. No matter what, this is too strange. There are children watching. Mom, what are those 2 uncles doing? Ah, it hurt your eyes, Ken, don't look. Hello, is this the police? There's a pervert taking off his clothes in the amusement park. Please come quickly. This is too shameful. In the staff lounge, there was a sudden loud noise. A huge dent and fist print appeared on the changing cabinet, and it even penetrated the cabinet and deeply imprinted on the wall. The young man with red eyes didn't have time to take off the leather cover on his body, and he roared angrily, I'm going to kill her. That be *starred woman. She actually treats us as clowns. I bet on the dignity of the Earthworm clan. I must kill her with my own hands. When he was furious, his face turned red. Scale-like scars appeared on his withered face. Next to him, two companions wearing Nini's and Lulu's cat skins were pulling his arms in a flurry. Hold it, hold it. Hi, it's not time to take action yet. Hi became more and more angry. It's bad enough that you're forced to dress up like this, but you're being humiliated with that kind of inexplicable standard. Can you bear it? Enough. Hi. How much more humiliating will you be before you stop? In the shadow, the old man, smoking a pipe, looked over. But if you can't even bear a little humiliation, then what kind of ninja are you? I wanted to say something, but under the pressure of the old man, he could only lower his head bitterly and stop talking. The employer's request didn't include killing people. Just make sure that the little girl is taken away. Don't make a mistake. The old man who was in charge of the operation reprimanded. Also, that woman called Motoko Hanamaki is not easy to deal with. Don't make trouble. Noon, is everything ready? A fat woman nodded respectfully. The secret ritual, Time of the Devil, has been set up. As long as they walk into the trap, we can take action at any time. Very good, then go and prepare. Don't make any more mistakes, especially Hai. Do you understand? Under the old man's gaze, Hai obediently lowered his head. Soon, the ninjas silently disappeared into the darkness, and the lounge returned to silence. Only the broken wardrobe was still embedded in the wall, making a faint whining sound. Haunted house. Huaisher looked at the eerie and scary building before finally turning to Makoto beside him. You want to visit this place? Yes, I've been looking forward to it for a long time. Doesn't it often appear in TV dramas? There are workers who dress up as ghosts to scare people, right? Something like that. Huaisher raised his head to look at the exaggerated building before him and could not help but shake his head. But a real haunted house is not like this. It doesn't feel real at all. If you want to visit a real haunted house, I can help you find one. There are definitely many in Ingzhou. It doesn't matter whether it's real or not. It's just fun. Let's go take a look together. After half a day of hard work, Makoto could already skillfully hug Miss Motoko's hand without seeming out of place. By the way, I'm not afraid of ghosts at all. I've watched horror movies since I was young. So Miss Motoko, you don't have to worry about me. Okay. Huaisher sighed and nodded. But the closer he got, the more he could feel the strange atmosphere in the air. It was not the strangeness and horror that the haunted house had purposely created, but it was a strange premonition and intuition. Although he could not tell whether it was an illusion or a premonition, it made his heart subtly alert. He stared at the door that was slowly opening before him and frowned. Makoto, don't stray too far away from me later. Okay. Makoto nodded vigorously and grabbed Miss Motoko's hand. She could not hide her excitement. Don't worry, I'll stay by Miss Motoko's side. Looking at her expression that was gradually becoming serious and cautious, and the tensed muscles on her arm, Makoto seemed to have understood something. There was a strange kind of cuteness in this contrast. Who would have thought that someone as powerful as Miss Motoko would be afraid of ghosts? But if that was the case, then the haunted house would be. Her eyes suddenly lit up, and endless motivation surged in her heart. Makoto, you can do it. Makoto, your chance is here. You have to try your best to show your courage later. When Miss Motoko is shaking from fear, open your arms to give her sincere warmth and love. As she thought about it, her smile became strange again. A haunted house is good. The scarier the better. Miss Motoko, don't be afraid. I'll protect you. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.